I used to think our house was normal. Pale blue siding, white porch railing, cedar trees that smelled sweet after rain. From the outside, it looked peaceful, the kind of home people drive past and think, a family lives there. They'd be right, technically. There was a family inside, me and my father, Martin Rains. But what went on behind those windows wasn't peaceful. It was ritual. Every morning started at 5. My father would knock on my door, soft but sharp. "Evan, it's time." I'd stumble out of bed, rubbing my eyes, and meet him at the dining table. 2 plates, 1 Bible, 1 candle burning in the middle like we were dining with God himself. "Repeat the verse," he'd say, voice low and calm. If I yawned, he'd start again from the top. If I hesitated, he'd say, "The word doesn't wait for the lazy, son." We'd go through an hour of prayer before breakfast, before I even looked outside. Afterward, he'd hand me a list. Chores, scripture study, sometimes just lines from sermons I had to copy into my notebook. Repetition builds faith, he'd remind me. My friends, well, I didn't have any. He never allowed visitors, no phone, no TV, no internet. He said the outside world was infected with lies. So I stayed inside and listened to him. For years. When I was little, I used to ask about Mom. Her name was Sarah, though Dad never said it out loud. He'd just tighten his jaw and quote, "A woman must be faithful to her home." I didn't understand then, but I do now. The only thing I knew was that she left when I was 6. That's what he told me anyway. She didn't fit God's design for this family. He said it with such conviction I almost believed him. Still, sometimes at night when the wind hit the cedar branches just right, I swore I could hear a woman humming. A soft, distant lullaby, one I'd never heard before but somehow knew was meant for me. It started with dust. A Saturday afternoon in May, sun bleeding through the blinds. Dad told me to clean the attic while he prepared for Sunday's reflection night. I hated the attic, the smell of mildew, the faint scurrying of mice in the corners. I was halfway through sweeping when I saw a brown paper bundle wedged between boxes of Christmas lights. I pulled it out, coughing as the dust flew. Inside was a photo album, cracked leather old as time. The first page stopped me cold. My mother, young, smiling, holding a baby wrapped in a blue blanket. Me. Her eyes were kind, not like the way Dad described her. As I turned the pages, my stomach twisted. Her face was blacked out in every later photo, thick marker strokes carved into the paper. In one, she stood beside Dad, and he was holding the same Bible he still carried every morning. It looked like a family until it didn't. When Dad came home, I tried to sound casual. "Hey, Dad," I said. "I found some old photos upstairs." He froze mid-step. His eyes flicked to the attic door, then back to me. "Photos?" His voice stayed calm, but something in it shifted. "Yeah, just, me and Mom. You guys looked happy." He set his Bible on the counter and walked toward me. "Evan," he said softly, "some people don't know when to stop asking questions." I tried to laugh. I didn't mean anything, I was just... Curiosity is the enemy of faith. His tone hardened, but his smile never changed. That was worse than shouting. The next day, the album was gone. So was the brown paper. When I asked, he said he'd disposed of temptation. That night, the humming outside my window sounded louder. Only this time, I didn't think it was the wind. 2 weeks later, he woke me before dawn. "Get dressed," he said. "We're going for a drive." He never liked driving. Said cars made people lazy. So when he told me to grab my coat, I felt my stomach twist. We drove past the city, past familiar gas stations and stoplights until the houses thinned out and the road turned to gravel. I watched the cedar trees blur by, the silence stretching like wire between us. Finally, he pulled over beside a clearing. The air smelled like dirt and rain. "Evan," he said, hands resting on the steering wheel, "you're almost a man now, old enough to understand what family loyalty means." He got out, opened the trunk. I followed slowly. Inside were my mother's things. A necklace, a red sweater, a camera, all neatly folded. He touched the sweater like it was sacred. "She broke the circle," he said. "But I forgave her. I always forgive." My heart pounded. "Dad, what do you mean?" He looked up. His eyes were glassy, calm. "She wanted to leave. She thought she could hide from God. But God doesn't lose his flock." The way he said it made my skin crawl. I stared at the dirt by his boots. Fresh, dark, disturbed. "Dad, we should go," I whispered. He smiled faintly. "Don't be afraid, son. Faith demands sacrifice." The ride home was silent. I kept my eyes on the window, counting mailboxes, memorizing turns. When we got back, he went to the basement to reflect. The door closed. The lock clicked. I sat in my room, shaking, clutching the old camera I'd taken from the trunk. It was heavy, too heavy, like it carried truth inside it. I didn't sleep that night. The house was too quiet. Even the creak of the floorboards seemed afraid to speak. I waited until the clock hit midnight, Dad's prayer hour. I could hear him downstairs whispering verses between the hum of the furnace. I stuffed a few clothes into my backpack, grabbed the camera, and crept toward the front door. But as my hand reached the knob, I heard a sound from the basement. A voice. Faint. Trembling. A woman's. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. "Please," she whispered. "Don't let him—" A sharp thud cut her off. Then silence. Then Dad's voice, calm, low, reciting Psalm 51. I ran. The screen door slammed behind me, and I sprinted barefoot down Willow Street. The air was cold and raw against my skin, the gravel cutting into my feet. I didn't look back, not until I reached the main road. A pair of headlights approached. A truck. I waved frantically. The driver, an older man, slowed down. "Kid, you okay?" I just kept saying, "He's not right. My dad's not right." The police came the next morning. I told them everything. The prayers, the rules, the photos, the trunk. They didn't say much while I spoke, just nodded and wrote things down. When they searched the house, they found the basement spotless. Fresh bleach, tools organized, floors scrubbed to bone-white shine. No woman, no body, no blood. But behind the cedar trees, the same ones that hummed at night, the soil was freshly turned, 6 feet wide, 2 feet deep. Dad was gone. They issued alerts, searched neighboring counties, but he'd vanished like mist. The camera I brought them had photos inside, old ones of me, Mom, and one I'd never taken, me asleep in my bed, shot through my window. Months later, I was in foster care, learning how to breathe again. I'd wake some nights to the sound of a car engine idling outside, but by the time I looked, the street was empty. Then one morning, a letter arrived. No return address. Inside was a photo. Me, sleeping in my new room. On the back, written in his handwriting, "The circle is never broken, son. I moved again. I still check my windows every night. Sometimes I dream of cedar branches swaying and a voice saying softly, 'Family is forever.' And every time, I wake up praying that's a lie. Blind obedience can disguise the darkest evils. Family should never demand silence, fear, or submission in the name of love. True faith, true loyalty. They thrive only in freedom, not control. Trust your doubts. Sometimes questioning is the only thing that keeps you alive." I still remember the night I met Harold Pierce, though I've tried my best to forget it. It was late December of 2017, and Maine was drowning in snow. The kind that doesn't just fall, it devours. I'd been living out of my car for almost 3 months, sleeping in the back seat with my coat pulled over me like a blanket. The diner I worked at barely paid enough for gas and soup. But I kept going, 1 cup of coffee at a time. That Sunday night, the highway was nearly empty. The world outside was white and soundless, like the whole planet had frozen mid-breath. I was serving the last of the truckers when he walked in. Middle-aged, tall, clean-shaven, wearing a wool coat and a gentle smile. His eyes were the color of faded denim. "Evenin', miss," he said, setting his gloves on the counter. "Cold one out there, huh?" "Coldest of the year," I replied, forcing a smile. I was tired, but his calm voice carried warmth. He ordered black coffee and a slice of apple pie, tipped $20 on a $5 bill. Over the next few weeks, he became a regular, always in the same booth, always at closing time. I started to look forward to those quiet moments. He'd ask about my day, tell small-town jokes, quote scripture sometimes, and end each conversation with, "Stay warm, Lena. The Lord looks after wanderers." He never flirted, never made me feel uneasy. That's what made me trust him. When my car broke down during a snowstorm one night after work, I sat crying in the freezing dark, steam rising from the hood like smoke from a dying beast. I didn't even see his headlights until he was already pulling over. "Lena?" he said, stepping out. "Are you hurt?" I shook my head. "No, just stranded." "Well?" He smiled softly. "No one should freeze to death trying to make it home. Come on, I live just off County Road 47. I'll drive you there. Got a spare room and hot stew waiting." Every instinct screamed, no, but desperation has a way of quieting instincts. The wind bit through my jacket, and the snow was falling too thick to see. So I nodded. His farmhouse sat like a ghost on a hill surrounded by white woods and silence. He parked in front of the porch, helped me with my bag, and led me inside. The warmth hit me like a drug. The place was old but spotless. Polished pine floors, lace curtains, and pictures on the wall. Portraits of a woman and a young girl. His wife and daughter, he said. They went to be with God a few years back. He made me tea and we talked by the fireplace. His voice was slow, almost melodic. Before I went to bed, he said with a strange tenderness, "Lena, dear, one small rule. Never open the basement door. That's where the house keeps its past." He smiled, but the light in his eyes dimmed a little when he said it. I thought he was joking. I laughed. He didn't. The next morning I woke to the sound of a piano, soft, almost mournful. The melody drifted through the hallway like smoke. I followed it to the living room, where Harold sat playing, eyes closed, lips moving silently. When he noticed me, he stopped and smiled. "Morning, sleepyhead," he said. "Breakfast's ready. Hope you like eggs and toast." The smell was heavenly, but something about the scene felt too staged. Everything in that house had its place. The books, the silverware, even the cushions were aligned perfectly. I tried to ignore it. Days passed with strange repetition. He'd wake me at dawn with the same hymn. We'd eat together, pray, and he'd talk endlessly about faith, purity, and obedience. I'd help him shovel snow, clean dishes, or read old church bulletins he collected. But he never stopped watching me. Every movement, every word. Once I locked my bedroom door before sleeping. The next morning it was open. When I confronted him, he smiled gently. "Trust builds safety, Lena. Locks build walls." I didn't argue, but something in his tone, it wasn't fatherly, it was possessive. That night I heard something beneath the floor, a faint hum, then a soft clank, like metal brushing metal. The sound came from the basement. The next morning, Harold was scrubbing the kitchen tiles on his knees. His hands were raw, red, bleeding. "You okay?" I asked, stepping closer. He didn't look up. "Sin leaves stains, dear. Some stains take longer to clean." I tried to laugh it off, but the smell of bleach burned my nose. Later, I noticed something else. A flicker of light under the basement door, around 2 a.m. I'd see it every night, like a candle glowing through the crack. Once, curiosity almost got me. I stood in front of that door, hand on the knob, heart hammering. But before I turned it, I heard his voice down the hall. "Lena, obedience brings safety." I froze. He was standing there in the dark, Bible in hand, smiling. I didn't sleep that night. By the end of the second week, my nerves were shot. Every sound made me jump. I needed to leave, but the storm had buried the roads again. The phone lines were down, and Harold said the snowplow wouldn't come for days. He acted like everything was normal. I acted like I believed him. One afternoon, while he was out chopping wood, I searched the house for a phone signal. Nothing, just static. In his study, I found old photos, not of his wife and daughter, but different girls. Dozens of them, some smiling, some not. None looked older than me. Then I heard it, a faint drip, drip, drip from below, the basement. I shouldn't have gone near it, but something inside me, fear or maybe instinct, pushed me. The door was locked, but the key hung on a hook near the pantry. My hands shook as I turned it. The smell hit first, bleach and rust. Then came the sound, soft, wet, and human. "Hello?" I whispered. A sob answered. I stepped down slowly, flashlight trembling in my grip. The concrete floor was slick. Chains hung from beams. Old jars lined a shelf, each labeled with a name written in faded ink. And then, a voice. "Please help me." I froze. The sound came from behind a wooden partition. Before I could move, a shadow appeared at the top of the stairs. "Lena?" Harold's voice was calm. Too calm. I turned, and he stood there holding a Bible, face half lit by the bulb. "The Lord tests obedience," he said. "You almost failed." He closed the door and locked it. Darkness swallowed me. When I woke, my wrists burned. I was tied to a chair, basement floor cold under my bare feet. Harold knelt in front of me, humming that same hymn. "Why are you doing this?" I choked. He smiled kindly, brushing a strand of hair from my face. "Because, dear, the world has dirtied you. But don't worry, I can make you pure again. You're sick." He slapped me, not hard but sharp enough to silence me. Then he began reciting verses. His words echoed off the walls like a sermon in hell. He brought water, a bucket, and a rag. "We'll wash the lies away," he whispered. Every time I begged, he prayed louder. His eyes shone with fanatic devotion. "You remind me of my daughter," he said once. "She disobeyed too." That's when I realized what happened to them. His wife, his child, the others. I waited until he left to fetch more bleach. I saw a nail sticking out of the wall and started sawing at the rope around my wrists. My skin tore, but I didn't stop. When he came back, I was ready. "Ready to be saved?" he asked, stepping closer. I swung the chair leg. It shattered against his arm. He screamed, dropping the bucket. I ran, slipping on the wet floor, grabbing the keyring from his belt as I passed. My fingers shook as I fumbled at the door lock. He lunged. I kicked backward, heard him crash into the table. The door burst open and I bolted up the stairs, barefoot, bleeding, gasping. "Lena!" he roared behind me. "You can't leave before you're pure." I ran into the snow, blind, lungs burning. His voice followed, humming that same cursed hymn through the trees. I reached a ranger cabin miles away, pounding on the door until my knuckles bled. When they found me, I was half frozen, mumbling prayers that weren't mine. The authorities went to the farmhouse the next morning. The basement was spotless, bleach on every surface. No bodies, just chains, jars, and children's shoes sealed in plastic. Harold Pierce was gone. His truck abandoned by the river, doors open, Bible on the seat. They searched for weeks, never found him. I spent months in therapy, jumping at every sound. Sometimes I still hear that hymn in my dreams, the one he played every morning, soft, slow, like a lullaby written by the devil. 2 months later, I got a package at the halfway home. No return address. Inside was a folded church bulletin from the Holy Shepherd Mission, County Road 47. Written in perfect penmanship. "Obedience brings salvation. I'm still praying for you." I burned it in the sink. But every now and then, When snow falls heavy and the wind carries through the pines, I swear I can hear the faint echo of piano keys, and his voice, whispering my name. Evil often wears a gentle smile and speaks softly of faith, trust, and love. Never let desperation silence your instincts. The truest faith lies not in blind obedience, but in the courage to question what feels wrong, even when kindness wears the mask of salvation. I was 17 when I realized our house had stopped feeling like home. Maybe it was the way the wind screamed against the windows, or the salt that never left the air, or maybe it was just grief wearing new disguises every day. After Mom died, everything tilted. My little brother Milo stopped talking for a while. Dad stopped smiling. The funeral came and went like a fog, and then there was silence. Long, heavy, endless silence inside that weathered gray house on the cliff. Dad used to be gentle. He'd tell us bedtime stories about shipwrecks and old sailors, pour hot chocolate on stormy nights, and let Milo fall asleep on his shoulder. But after the accident, his warmth turned into rules. He said routines helped him keep the world in order. He said Fridays were special. He called them family nights of truth. The first time, I thought it was his way of coping, just a game. He brought out a deck of worn playing cards and a small notebook with our names written neatly across the top. Douglas, Olivia, Milo. He set 3 wooden tokens in the center of the table and smiled the way people smile when they're trying not to cry. Games reveal the soul, he said. We play, we confess, we heal. We played like it mattered. He'd shuffle, deal, and every time someone lost, they had to share a truth. It started small, favorite color, biggest fear, dumb lies from childhood. But soon, the questions changed. What's something you've hidden from me? What's something your mother never knew? His voice never rose. He never sounded angry, but his eyes, sharp, glassy, waiting, made me feel like every answer was a test. That first Friday ended with him patting my hand gently. Good. Honesty keeps the family pure. I didn't sleep that night. A week later, I noticed the camera. It was small, silver, almost invisible above the kitchen shelf. A red light blinked, just once every few seconds. I thought maybe he'd bought it for security, but when I asked, he smiled too wide. Observing behavior keeps the soul aligned, he said. After that, I started noticing more. A black lens tucked near the living room clock. Another on the stairway. One hidden behind a vent in the hallway. Always blinking. Always watching. Milo caught on too. One morning, he slipped me a folded note under the table. I think he reads my journal. I wanted to tell him it wasn't possible, but I didn't believe that myself. Dad seemed to know everything. When we whispered, when we lied, when we dreamed of leaving. Every Friday night, the game continued. He kept score in his notebook. Losers confessed. Winners stayed quiet. Remember, he'd say, his hand resting on the cards. Lying is poison. Confession is the cure. Milo started to fidget whenever Friday came. He'd fake stomach aches or pretend to fall asleep early. But Dad always woke him, gentle as ever. We don't hide from the truth, he'd whisper. The truth was turning into a weapon. I caught him one night watching playback on the living room camera, whispering to himself like he was taking notes. Patterns, he said. Deviations. Lies. That was when I started planning. It happened on a stormy Friday. Thunder rolling in from the sea, windows rattling like warning bells. Dad set up the game as usual, calm, methodical. But Milo was trembling. Can we skip tonight? He asked softly. Please. Dad's face didn't change. Truth doesn't wait, son. Deal the cards. Milo's hands shook so badly he dropped them. Dad's smile faltered for the first time in months. Careless hands come from careless hearts, he murmured. Maybe you've forgotten what this night means. I don't want to play anymore, Milo whispered. The silence stretched so long I thought time stopped. Then Dad leaned forward, eyes sharp as glass. "You don't get to decide that," he said. I reached across the table. "Dad, stop, he's scared." "He's learning," Dad snapped, voice cracking just slightly before he caught himself. "We all are." That night, I found Milo crying in his room. He had a cut on his wrist, small, shallow, but enough to make me freeze. "He said I lied about Mom," Milo whispered. "He said she's disappointed in me." I held him until he fell asleep, the storm pounding outside. When I stepped into the hall, I saw the red light blinking again. Steady, patient, unblinking. 3 weeks later, I told Dad I needed to go to the store for supplies. It was the first time he'd let me leave alone since Mom's death. He handed me the car keys and said, "Truth runs errands too." Milo sat in the passenger seat clutching his backpack. We drove down the dirt road, past the cliffs, the fog so thick it felt like the sea had swallowed the sky. When I reached the curve overlooking the rocks, I slowed down and whispered, "Now." We jumped. The car rolled to a stop behind us, engine still running. We ran through the fog, down the slope, feet slipping on wet grass, lungs burning. I didn't look back, but I could hear something. The faint echo of Dad's voice carried by the wind. Games reveal the soul. We reached a neighbor's house just before dawn. I pounded on the door until an old man opened it, eyes wide. "Please," I gasped. "He's watching us. He's not right." The police came within the hour. They found the cameras, the notebook, the cards, the tokens. But Dad was gone. It's been years since that night. Milo and I live in Portland now. He's in high school, plays guitar, laughs again. I still wake up some nights to the sound of shuffling cards. But it's just the wind, I tell myself. The police never found him. They think he might have fallen from the cliffs or maybe just disappeared into the fog. But I know better. Sometimes late at night I'll be sitting in my apartment and a faint click will echo through the room, like a camera shutter. Once I even found a note slipped under my door. "Honesty keeps the family pure." Same handwriting, same calm phrasing. The police said it was a prank, but deep down I know he's out there, watching, waiting, maybe even proud that I finally learned the lesson he wanted to teach. Because now, I tell the truth. I tell it in therapy, in writing, in whispers to myself. And every time I do, I feel like he's listening. When love becomes control, it stops being love. Truth should heal, not haunt. Those who use honesty as a weapon twist faith into fear. And the only real escape is learning that freedom sometimes means breaking the rules written by those who claim to love you most. I left Boston on a gray Thursday morning, the sky heavy with rain and the memory of a lifetime in that cramped, toxic apartment weighing me down like a wet coat I couldn't shake off. My roommate, Liz, had always found ways to undermine me, belittling my art, borrowing my brushes without asking, and turning every little mistake into a catastrophe. I needed space. I needed air. I needed to feel safe again. And Vermont, with its dense pine forests and lakes that seemed carved from memory itself, called to me like a sanctuary. I packed my old hatchback with canvases, paints, a stack of journals, and the bare necessities. My parents were too far away to help, scattered across the country, and friends had their own lives. I was 30, alone, and utterly determined to begin over. I hadn't realized how much Boston had drained me until I hit the winding dirt roads of coastal Vermont, the kind that curled around hillsides and lakes with the careless elegance of something untouched by city chaos. That evening, at a small art festival in Montpelier, I met Gideon Hale. He was older than anyone I'd dated, maybe in his late 40s, with a calm voice that drew you in, and a smile that suggested knowledge but never arrogance. He complimented my paintings, spoke about technique, and seemed to understand the kind of obsession that came from loving your work too much. "Your brushwork," he said, tilting his head as he studied a watercolor of pines, "has the kind of honesty most artists lose by 25. Don't let anyone dull that." I felt warmth spread in my chest. Praise from strangers didn't usually move me. but something in his eyes made me feel safe. Weeks passed, filled with mentorship and long drives to secluded galleries where he showed me rare pieces he'd collected. Then, one evening, almost casually, he offered me a stay at his private cabin on Blackwater Lake. "It's quiet, private. Just enough space for your art to breathe," he said, voice gentle, eyes gleaming. "I promise, no distractions." I hesitated. The thought of leaving my city life behind scared me, but exhaustion and loneliness had clouded my judgment. I agreed. The cabin was stunning, perched on the edge of Blackwater Lake. Pine needles carpeted the ground outside. The air smelled of cedar, wet earth, and the faint tang of the lake itself. Large windows offered endless views of the water, and the wooden floors creaked underfoot, almost like the house itself was breathing. For a moment, I felt as if I'd stepped into a painting. Gideon's rules were simple but strange. No photos inside, phones only after 9. Never enter the lower guest room. At first I laughed. He seemed eccentric, harmless even. But then subtle things began to unsettle me. The way he watched me sit. The way he noted when I looked at my phone. His soft comments on obedience and curiosity. It wasn't menacing at first. It was almost imperceptible. But it made my chest tighten in a way I hadn't felt since the roommate fiasco. Then the small items started appearing. A rusted bracelet on the nightstand. A folded note with the name Marissa written neatly in ink. I asked him about them. "Reminders," he said, smiling but not warmly. "Curiosity, Claire, can be dangerous." At night I heard soft creaking above, the kind of slow, irregular noises that could be anything, or someone. The guest room, forbidden to me, seemed to whisper from below. I started locking my door, leaving the lights on, pacing the floors. Every shadow felt heavier than it should, every wind gust like a presence brushing past the windows. One morning I tried to leave, claiming I had an appointment in town. Gideon insisted on driving me, but he took a back road through thick pine and mud, the cabin appearing again and again, as if calling me back. My gut nodded. Inside he showed me a small room lined with envelopes and objects. Bracelets, photographs, sketches of women's faces, small personal items. My stomach dropped. "They were curious, like you," he said, voice calm but terrifying. I wanted to protect them from the chaos outside. Fear flooded me. Escape wasn't just difficult, it was being controlled at every turn. My pulse hammered in my ears as I realized I'd underestimated him, underestimated the danger. The windows, the back doors, even the forest around us, and everything felt like part of his trap. I began plotting quietly, noting exits, keeping my phone on vibrate in a hidden pocket. Each brush of wind against the cabin, each rustle of the trees became a countdown. He didn't need to speak to terrify me. The silence itself was a warning. The storm hit suddenly, lightning cracking over the lake, thunder rolling across the hills. I waited until Gideon was distracted with a fire I pretended to admire. Then I slipped out a side door, barefoot, mud squishing between my toes, pine needles scratching my legs. I ran without thinking, propelled by sheer instinct and the knowledge that hesitation would kill me. I reached the highway at dawn and flagged down a passing car. The driver, a middle-aged man in a faded pickup, didn't ask questions. I collapsed in the passenger seat, drenched, shivering, muttering only, "Somebody, please, help." Police later searched the cabin. Gideon was gone. The guest room was empty except for a rusted bracelet and dozens of envelopes labeled with women's names and dates. Some had letters inside, others sketches, all meticulous. The realization made my stomach churn. I hadn't been the first, and I might not have been the last. Months later, I'd moved to a small city, rented a studio apartment filled with my paintings, and cautiously rebuilt a life that had nearly been stolen. I still flinched at unexpected knocks, still smelled pine in strange places, still felt the lingering presence of someone watching. But I had survived. I painted late into the nights, poured myself into colors and shapes, and learned to trust myself again. My fear had carved a scar in my mind, but it had also taught me vigilance, courage, and the importance of boundaries. Sometimes, when I walk alone by a lake or through a forest, I feel the echo of that cabin behind me, the creak of the floors, the rustle of leaves, the shadow of a calm, piercing gaze. But I remind myself, I am no longer the frightened girl who followed blindly. I am Claire Donovan. I am alive. I am free. And I will never let curiosity blind me again. True independence and safety require discernment and boundaries. Trust is precious, but it must be earned. And courage is not the absence of fear. It is choosing to move forward despite it. Trauma may leave scars, but survival transforms them into wisdom. The first morning in my own apartment, the sunlight hit the pale walls like a promise. I brewed coffee, the aroma filling the small kitchen, and for the first time in years, I didn't have to worry about someone judging how I held the mug, whether the creases on the counter aligned with invisible lines etched in my childhood home. Portland, Maine felt like a fresh canvas, quiet, unassuming, and entirely mine. I'd grown up under my father, Ethan Lane, whose obsession with perfection was suffocating. After my mother died, he retreated into a world of rules. Every book lined perfectly on a shelf, every spoon equidistant from the others, every drawer folded with exact precision. A misplaced pillow or a crooked picture frame wasn't met with yelling. It was met with the cold, silent disappointment that gnawed at your confidence until you believed you had done something irredeemably wrong. Leaving that house had been my liberation. I changed cities, rented a small townhouse in a cul-de-sac lined with overgrown hedges, and told myself I was free. And for a while, I was. The apartment was modest, a tiny living room, a kitchen just big enough for me, and a bedroom I could close off from the world. I unpacked slowly, taking care to arrange things as I liked. Mismatched mugs, colorful blankets, and stacks of notebooks teeming with my sketches. I left a note on the fridge for myself, a small reminder. You're allowed to live your life your way. But it started almost immediately. Little things that made my stomach tighten. A sense that someone else was watching the angles of my life even here. My laundry was folded neatly, almost as if it had been pressed into symmetry. My bed was made perfectly. Pale blue sheets I hadn't seen in years, identical to the ones from my childhood bedroom. At first I laughed. Maybe a neighbor found a spare key. But no one had one. I double-checked. Every lock, every latch, every bolt was secure. Still, the feeling lingered. A subtle pressure at the edge of my mind, like static electricity brushing against my thoughts. I told myself it was paranoia, the last echo of years under my father's meticulous watch. But deep down, I knew freedom had limits I hadn't anticipated. Days passed, and the small disturbances became harder to dismiss. Objects moved slightly from where I left them. A vase on the counter would tilt, books on a shelf would be slightly rearranged. I'd open drawers to find them perfectly organized, each item aligned, almost mocking the chaos I was trying to cultivate in my life. One evening I cooked a stew I hadn't planned. The scent of cedar and peppermint suddenly hit me, faint but unmistakable, curling around the edges of the apartment. I froze, spoon hovering midair, heart thundering. No one should smell like cedar and peppermint inside my apartment, I thought. But then I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was air from outside, a neighbor burning incense. When I reviewed my security footage, I saw a shadow slipping past the frame, tall, upright, familiar. The posture, the gait, the slow, deliberate movement down the hall. Unmistakably him, Ethan, my father. My stomach clenched. I had changed cities, changed locks, changed my phone number, even moved to a new state, and yet there he was, walking through my home without a single obstruction. He didn't force the door. He didn't break anything. He simply entered, as if his presence alone had the power to bypass walls, locks, and alarms. I tried to tell myself it was a glitch, a trick of light, but I knew better. I knew his control wasn't just about doors or locks. It was about presence, about a psychological tether that had followed me even into my adulthood. The morning he appeared at my doorstep, I nearly dropped the coffee mug in shock. "Harper," he said, voice calm, polite, with that same serene inflection I had dreaded all my life. "I just wanted to check on my little girl. You've grown so fast." I backed up, heart racing, trying to keep my composure. You can't be here. How did you find me?" He smiled, perfectly serene. "The world is chaotic, Harper. I just want to keep you safe. You can't truly live until you learn the rules." I wanted to scream, to slam the door, to throw him out like I had imagined for years. But there was no anger in his voice, only calm obsession. He didn't feel like a man invading a home. He felt like a force that had always existed, patient and relentless. "I don't need your rules," I whispered, trembling. "I live my life my way." "Rules aren't punishment," he said softly. "They are structure, safety. You will see one day." I shut the door and locked it 3 times. My hands shook. My body felt both exhausted and electrified. Even now, his presence clung to me, like the shadow of a tree stretching over my apartment, unmovable. I didn't stay. I fled that night, taking only essentials. I moved from friend to friend, city to city, trying to shake the sense that I was never alone. Even when I changed apartments, every subtle movement of objects, a slightly crooked picture frame, a folded napkin, a lingering scent, reminded me of him. I installed cameras. I changed locks. I asked trusted friends to check in, to help me feel some safety. I thought that moving was enough, but I quickly realized that the control he exerted wasn't bound by doors or fences. It was psychological, emotional, a tether stronger than any lock. Some nights I would wake, imagining him standing in the doorway, calm, smiling, waiting for me to falter. The fear of his return never fully left me, but I grew stronger. I documented, I planned, I fortified, and I reminded myself that my life, my choices, my freedom, belonged to me. Over time, I built routines. I learned to recognize the subtle signs of manipulation, the lingering scents, the oddly placed objects. I practiced mindfulness and therapy, learning to rebuild the confidence my father's control had eroded. I kept my apartment organized in my own way, not in fear, but with intention. I still flinched at unexpected noises, still smelled cedar or peppermint and felt a shiver run through me. But instead of panic, I reminded myself, these are memories, not current threats. I survived. I started dating, cautiously, slowly. I painted again, filling journals with sketches, colors, and landscapes of places I'd been and wanted to go. Each stroke reminded me that freedom is fragile, but it can be nurtured. I will always carry the scars, the lingering awareness that some control cannot be blocked with locks alone. But survival, courage, and discernment are stronger than fear. I am Harper Lane, no longer a child under watchful eyes. And finally, I live my life on my own terms. True freedom is not just about escaping physical confinement. It is about reclaiming your mind, asserting boundaries, and nurturing inner strength. Even when control lingers in memory, awareness and courage allow you to live fully and authentically. I grew up thinking my family was perfect. Our house on the quiet cul-de-sac in Burlington, Vermont looked like something out of a magazine. Colonial style, 2 stories, snow-dusted lawns in winter, trimmed hedges, and a small frozen pond in the backyard. From the outside, we had it all. Holidays in matching outfits, music recitals, barbecues that made neighbors nod approvingly. My mother, Claire Monroe, was warm and gentle, always smiling. My father, Gideon Monroe, was calm, composed, and demanding. But he had this way of making discipline feel like protection. I was 25 now, but I can still remember the first time I understood the difference between rules and obsession. It was a December evening when I was 12. My sister Lila and I were sitting on the couch trying to watch a movie when Dad walked past, muttering to himself. "Alex, Lila, the front door?" he said quietly, stopping mid-step. "Locked?" "Yes, Dad," I said, feeling the hair on my neck stand up. He nodded once, satisfied, then continued pacing, whispering numbers and calculations to himself. Lila leaned close to me. "Alex, he doesn't sleep, does he?" I shrugged, trying not to sound scared. "I think he sleeps with one eye open." By 16, I understood that perfection in our house wasn't just a goal. It was a cage, a crooked picture frame, a candy wrapper left out. Even a small lie could trigger silent correction. There was no yelling, no outbursts, just a calm, unwavering presence that would watch, observe, and wait until guilt crushed you. I tried to see it differently, to rationalize it as discipline, as care. But by the time I graduated, I knew the truth. The house was a prison, and our family had been its unwitting inmates. When I left for college, I thought I had escaped. I moved across town, convinced that distance could sever the chains of my upbringing. But even miles away, the effect lingered. I still flinched at sudden movements, still lined up my books just so, as though doing otherwise would summon some quiet judgment. The real fracture happened one winter night when Lila called me in a panic. "Alex, he's different now. Mom, she's yelling at me. I don't know why." I didn't hesitate. I drove straight back, the snow crunching under my tires, anxiety knotting my stomach. The house was the same, outwardly perfect. But the air inside was wrong, heavy, thick, charged with something I couldn't name. I found Claire in the kitchen, her hands trembling as she adjusted the sugar bowl. She looked up at me, eyes wide, lips pressed together. "Mom, what's happening?" I asked softly. She shook her head. "Gideon, something's wrong. I can't." Her voice trailed off. I realized then that the perfection I had admired from the outside wasn't care. It was a methodical erosion of autonomy. My father had taken patience and love and transformed them into control, using calmness as a weapon. I began noticing subtle changes. Furniture shifted slightly. Doors that should have been locked were precisely aligned in a way only he could execute. Journals rewritten in his hand. Every object, every gesture, every moment in the house seemed designed to instill the same quiet terror I remembered as a child. By the time I was 18, I had to confront him. One evening after dinner, I stayed behind while Lila went to her room. I took a deep breath and said, "Dad, enough. You're hurting Mom. You can't keep doing this." He looked at me, calm, serene. His expression never faltered. "Hurting? Alex, I am protecting her, protecting this family. You don't understand. The world out there, it's diseased. Only here is safe." I noticed then the hidden cameras, tiny, almost invisible, the meticulous arrangement of chairs and tables, the notes he left for my mother rewritten in his hand. It hit me like a punch. Safety in this house was a lie. The perfection was a cage, and he held the key. I wanted to scream. I wanted to break the cameras, smash the walls, tear down every rule he had etched into the fabric of our lives. But I also knew anger wasn't enough. If we were to survive, we had to be smart. Quiet defiance was the only weapon I had. That night I stayed awake watching the hall, cataloging every movement, memorizing every step he took, every pattern, every ritual. Survival required observation. I spent months planning. Lila and I couldn't simply run. We had to mask our intentions until the moment was right. We packed essentials quietly, leaving the house as if for a day trip. In the dark of night, we loaded the car, leaving nothing behind that could draw attention. Driving away, snow crunching under the tires, I felt an unfamiliar exhilaration. Fear still pulsed through me, but there was hope too. Claire, my mother, had moments of lucidity, even smiles, though anxiety lingered. Lila clung to me, silent and wide-eyed, as though afraid to believe freedom could exist. Even miles away, the house haunted us. I found letters slipped under doors, unsigned but unmistakable in intent. You may leave, but perfection always watches. You belong to me and to the family rules. I realized then that the most dangerous prisons aren't physical. They are built of observation, habit, and psychological control. Even in the open air, the shadows of his obsession followed us. But we were free, not fully healed, not fully unscarred, but moving forward. Years later, we live in a modest townhouse in a town where neighbors are kind but unaware of our past. Claire occasionally snaps, anxiety flooding her like winter ice, but she also laughs at small, ordinary moments. Lila sleeps with the lights on, still wary of shadows, but she smiles more often than not. I keep journals, detailing our experiences, observing patterns, and reminding myself of boundaries. I sometimes dream of the old house, the quiet control, the meticulous alignments, the invisible eyes that watched. But those dreams no longer terrify me. They remind me of resilience. The real horror wasn't the yelling, the punishment, or the rules. It was calmness paired with obsession, patience used as a weapon, and the invisible pressure of control that shaped every thought, every fear, every movement. I survived, and in surviving I found strength. I learned that even when control reaches deeply, autonomy can be reclaimed with courage, careful observation, and determination. Freedom is not forgetting, but choosing to live despite the shadows that linger. True control is not always violent. Often it is subtle, patient, and silent. Recovery requires awareness, courage, and the willingness to assert boundaries. Even when psychological scars remain, reclaiming autonomy and choosing your own life is the ultimate form of liberation. I never thought I'd be back in Willow Creek, Oregon, not after everything I had left behind. After my divorce in 2022, my life felt like a half-burned bridge I couldn't cross again. I had tried to start over in Portland, chasing freelance gigs and cheap coffee shops, but the emotional toll of a messy split, the betrayal and the loneliness left me hollow. I called my mom almost reluctantly. Maybe reconnecting with family would be grounding, or at least temporary shelter from the storm of my own life. The drive back was long, winding through damp forests where fog clung to the trees like breath. Every mile brought memories I hadn't revisited in years. My mom's laughter bouncing off the walls of our old house, my dad's quiet sighs as he tinkered in the garage, the smell of rain on the wooden porch. I tried to tell myself this was just nostalgia, not a reason to hope too much. But when I finally pulled up to the house, the familiar white siding and blue shutters made something ache in me I didn't know I had left. Mom greeted me at the door with her signature smile, the one that always made me feel seen, even as a teenager. "Vivienne, you're home. Come in, come in. You look tired." Her arms wrapped around me, and for a moment, I let myself sink into that embrace. The house smelled the way I remembered it, cinnamon and pine cleaner, soft and safe. Or so I thought. Over the next few days, Mom insisted on helping me settle in. She fussed over my room, unpacking boxes I hadn't even wanted to touch, and she introduced a routine that included daily pills she claimed would help me sleep and calm my anxiety. I was weary, raw from the divorce, and for once I let someone else take care of me. The pills were small, beige, easy to swallow, and she always handed them to me with that warm, steady gaze that begged for trust. At first it felt harmless. I slept better, my thoughts slowed, and I told myself that maybe reconnecting with Mom was exactly what I needed. But after a week, things started slipping. I would wake up in the middle of the night, unsure of how I got there. My arms bore faint scratches, and once a friend texted me back with words I hadn't typed. My stomach churned with unease, and the trust I'd given Mom felt suddenly like a trap. One night, I skipped the pills. The effect was immediate. The fog in my mind lifted, and I saw the house for what it really was, not welcoming, but quietly watchful. Shadows lurked in corners, Ordinary furniture seemed oddly positioned, and the silence carried a weight that made my skin crawl. That night, sleep came reluctantly, and my dreams were heavy with the sense that I was being watched. The next day, I started noticing oddities I had previously ignored. Smoke detectors that seemed oddly positioned, picture frames angled just so. My instincts screamed at me that Mom was watching, not just from a distance, but closely, intimately. I felt a creeping panic, a sense that the person I thought I knew, my mother, was something entirely else behind closed doors. It wasn't just paranoia. That night, I searched the living room and bedroom and found what I'd feared. Hidden cameras, their lenses disguised in everyday objects tracking my movements. Panic rolled through me like fire. I backed away from the frames, my mind racing. Every memory of Mom's warmth felt like a lie. I found myself in the study, a place I rarely entered as a child. There, behind the locked drawers, I discovered a small metal lockbox. Inside were meticulous records, names of women I didn't recognize, fake prescriptions, and handwritten notes detailing manipulative techniques. My hands trembled. The horrifying realization hit me. I wasn't the first. My mother, the woman I loved, had spent years drugging, monitoring, and controlling vulnerable women. The horror was incomprehensible. And just like that, the home I had returned to thinking it was safe had become a cage. I wanted to leave immediately, but fear and confusion pinned me to the study floor. The truth about my mother's life pressed down like a physical weight. How could someone who raised me, who had kissed my scraped knees and wiped away tears, be capable of such calculated control? I tried to process, but the house itself seemed alive, whispering the secrets it held. Every creak of the floorboards made me jump, every shadow seemed like it could lunge. I waited, heart hammering, until I heard the familiar shuffle of Mom's footsteps. "Vivian, what are you doing in here?" Her voice was soft, melodic, almost comforting. My stomach knotted. I was just looking for a pen," I lied, keeping my voice steady, though the room spun around me. She smiled, and that smile was different now, twisted, with an edge I hadn't known existed. "Just make sure you take your pills tonight, honey. You need to sleep. You'll feel better." She lingered, watching me like a hawk. My heart raced, but I nodded, pretending compliance. That night, I didn't take the pills. I stayed awake, pacing the floor, counting ceiling tiles, listening for her movements. Fear and adrenaline kept me alert. Hours passed. Then, in a fit of resolve, I decided I couldn't just sit and wait. I had to understand fully what I was dealing with. I returned to the study and examined the lockbox again. One drawer held binders detailing women she had controlled. Dates, locations, drug dosages, escape attempts. Another drawer contained a set of syringes, some filled with amber liquid. Panic surged. I realized she had been preparing me from the first day I arrived, slowly dulling my awareness, eroding my ability to trust my own senses. I knew the moment I was caught would be deadly. My mother wasn't reckless. She was patient, calculating, precise. But I couldn't leave without evidence. I spent hours taking pictures on my phone, documenting everything. Every file, every hidden camera, every note could save someone else. Finally, exhaustion forced me to bed. My eyes barely closed before I heard the softest creak of the study door opening. I froze, heart in my throat. "Vivian," Mom whispered, her voice low, almost hypnotic. "Don't do anything foolish." I stayed perfectly still, pretending to be asleep. After a long minute, the footsteps receded. Relief washed over me, but I knew it was temporary. My mother would not stop. Not ever. I had to find a way out, carefully, quietly, without alerting her. My freedom depended on cunning, patience, and luck. And for the first time, I realized I was capable of both. The next night, I prepared. I memorized Mom's routines, the hours she spent in the kitchen, when she left the house, when she slept. My backpack contained a flashlight, my phone, and the small lockpick set I had brought on a whim. I had no idea if I could make it, but staying was no longer an option. At 11:47 p.m., as the house settled into silence, I slipped out of bed. My bare feet made almost no sound on the cold hardwood. I checked the living room first, then the kitchen. Mom's bedroom door was shut, and I could hear the low hum of the night. I moved to the bathroom, lifted the window, and forced it open. The cool air hit me like a jolt of electricity. The streets of Willow Creek were quiet, damp with fog. I ran, barefoot, heart slamming, ears straining for any sound of pursuit. I navigated the narrow roads instinctively, relying on memory from my childhood walks. Each step felt like liberation, but also like stepping out of reality into pure fear. After what felt like an eternity, I found the police station. My lungs burned, my hands shook, but I was alive. The officers listened, skeptical at first, but the evidence I had gathered, the photos, the records, the hidden cameras, left them no choice. Marlene Harper's reign of control ended that night, but the trauma lingered in me. Even years later, at exactly 8 a.m. and 9 p.m., I felt a chill run down my spine, a reminder of the pills, the fog, the control. Some memories, I realized, never fade. The authorities uncovered the depth of Marlene's manipulation. The women she controlled had been isolated, drugged, and psychologically terrorized. Diaries, medical records, and manipulated text messages painted a chilling portrait. I spoke to investigators, recounting my experiences, trying to make sense of what I had lived through. Each detail I shared was a tiny exorcism, a reclaiming of my voice and agency. Therapy helped me, slowly, to recognize that the trauma was not my fault. But the psychological residue remained. Flashbacks, mistrust, and moments of hypervigilance reminded me that freedom is not a cure for fear. Years later, I live in a small apartment in Portland. The fog of my past never fully lifts, but I feel stronger, more vigilant. I've rebuilt my life carefully, surrounding myself with people I trust. I returned once more to Willow Creek, not for closure, but to witness the house decay, stripped of the life Marlene controlled. The windows were broken, paint chipped, weeds overtaking the garden, the lockbox and cameras long gone. And yet, in the wind, I swear I hear faint echoes of control, whispers that the house remembers. But I have learned something crucial. Control can be taken, but trauma cannot always be erased. I cannot forget, but I can choose how to live. True freedom requires vigilance, courage, and the willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. Evil can hide in the most familiar places, even within family. And the only path to survival is reclaiming your voice, trusting your instincts, and never letting fear dictate your life. Trauma may linger, but strength and awareness can transform it into resilience. I never thought moving could feel this heavy. At 16, I'd already spent half my life watching my parents rip each other apart in courtrooms, lawyers' offices, and late-night phone calls that ended in yelling. When my mom announced she was marrying Victor Crane and we'd moved to Ashford, Connecticut, I was hesitant. Part of me wanted stability, yes, but another part of me was terrified of repeating the same cycle with someone new. Ashford was quiet, almost eerily so. The streets were lined with red brick houses and maple trees just beginning to shed their leaves, orange and crimson drifting across freshly paved sidewalks. Everything looked picturesque, like something out of a postcard. I should have felt lucky. I should have been relieved. Instead, my stomach knotted with unease the moment we pulled into our new driveway. Victor was waiting on the porch, crisp in his slacks and button-down, a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He shook my hand firmly. "Ethan, welcome home," he said, and for a moment I tried to return the warmth. But there was rigidity to his posture, the way his gaze flicked to the windows, the way his jaw tightened for just a second before relaxing. He was polite, controlled, too calculated. The first few days passed in a blur of boxes, unpacking, and Victor's strict rules. Lights out at 10 p.m., no phone use after dinner, and most importantly, never touch the basement door. "It's just storage," he'd said, voice calm, reassuring. But the chains and padlock outside the door, heavy and industrial, told a different story. Victor's hands lingered near the doorknob more than once when he thought I wasn't looking, and sometimes I could swear he was listening, even when he was out in the yard. At night, the house spoke. Not with voices, not really, but with thumps, scratches, and the occasional low whimper that drifted up from below. Mom told me it was just the old pipe settling, but I felt it in my chest. The house was alive with something else. Curiosity wrestled with fear every time I heard it. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, but when sleep didn't come, the shadows seemed sharper, more menacing. I couldn't take it anymore one night. Around 3 in the morning, I slipped from my room, flashlight in hand, and approached the basement. The door was massive, the chains cold under my fingers, the padlock heavier than I imagined. My pulse pounded in my ears. I turned the handle just enough to peek through the small crack. Then he appeared. Victor. Sweat slicking his forehead, eyes glinting in the flashlight's beam. "Go back to bed," he muttered, voice low but filled with a tension that made me freeze. I backed away without a word. He lingered for a heartbeat, then disappeared down the hall. My curiosity had cost me nothing that night, but my instincts screamed that whatever lay behind that door was dangerous. Days passed, but my unease only grew. I noticed Victor's routines, his odd hours, the way he checked the basement at odd times, the intensity of his gaze when he thought I wasn't looking. I tried to ask Mom about it, carefully. "Ethan, it's just storage," she said, brushing it off with a smile that didn't meet her eyes. "Victor's careful, that's all." Careful. The word lingered, taste bitter on my tongue. I didn't believe her, and one night, curiosity won again. I had brought a bobby pin from my bathroom kit. Standing before the basement door, I worked at the lock quietly, turning the pin carefully until the padlock clicked. My heart slammed. Slowly, I pushed the door open. What I saw made me freeze. Chains hung from the ceiling, swinging slightly, tools stained dark with something that smelled like iron. On the walls, Polaroids of boys, some familiar faces from the local school district, eyes wide in terror, some distorted in fear. My stomach turned. Bile rose in my throat. Every sound from the house seemed amplified. The ticking of a clock, the hum of the furnace, even the wind outside. I wanted to scream, to run, but I knew if I did, Victor would appear before I even got to the stairs. My hands shook as I grabbed one of the Polaroids and shoved it into my backpack. That would be proof, something to show the authorities, something tangible. Victor's boots pounded the staircase before I could think, and he appeared looming. "What are you doing down here?" His voice cut through the air, sharp and commanding. I pressed my back into a corner, forcing a casual expression, pretending to search for something I'd dropped. Victor stared for a long minute, eyes icy, reading me like a book. Then, almost without warning, he left, his footsteps heavy and deliberate. I stayed frozen until I heard the door click shut, then bolted to my room. The house no longer felt like home. It felt like a trap. The next morning I told Mom everything. My voice trembled, the words barely coherent. "Mom, the basement. There are chains, Polaroids. I saw them." Her face paled, but she forced a tight smile. "Ethan, I think you're imagining things. That door, it's always been just storage." I wanted to argue, to show her the photo, but fear stopped me. She had always been my anchor, my protector, and I didn't want to destroy that image of her. Instead, I packed the Polaroid in my notebook, hidden beneath the pages, a secret talisman of truth. That afternoon, I went to the local police station. Officer Harlan listened carefully as I recounted everything. My voice was shaky, my eyes wide, but I was determined to be heard. When I returned home with an officer, the basement appeared normal, just old furniture, Boxes, dust, chains gone, photos gone. Victor had vanished. The house was empty. My evidence, physical but fragile, was all that remained. Every sound in the walls, every shadow in the corner, reminded me he could be anywhere, watching. The officers took the Polaroid as proof, but they couldn't charge him without further evidence. I felt powerless. I had witnessed something monstrous, but the world outside the house couldn't see it. All I could do was wait, watch, and keep the memory alive. Months passed, but Ashford never felt safe. Every creak in the floor, every gust of wind against the windows sent chills down my spine. Nights were worse. Sometimes I thought I could hear the faintest whisper, a voice carried on the wind. Shadows in the corners of my room made my stomach knot. School became an escape, but even there, my mind drifted back to the basement, to Victor's eyes, to the Polaroids. Friends noticed my silence, my jumpiness. "Ethan, you okay?" one asked. I forced a nod, smiled faintly, but inside I felt fractured. I knew one thing with certainty. Some secrets are too dark to fully uncover. Some truths live just beneath the surface, waiting to emerge. And some monsters don't leave a trail. They vanish, leaving only fear in their wake. Years later, I moved out of Ashford. College, part-time jobs, new friends. I built a life that didn't require me to look over my shoulder. But at night, in quiet moments, I still hear it. The metallic scent of the basement, the faint whimpers, the clatter of chains in my mind. The Polaroid still rests in my notebook under my bed. Sometimes I take it out just to remind myself that I survived, that I saw the truth and didn't succumb. Victor Crane is gone, or maybe he isn't, but I've learned to live with the shadows. I've learned vigilance, awareness, and the value of trusting my instincts. I've learned that fear, while paralyzing, can also be a guide. And though some secrets are never fully uncovered, survival is about reclaiming your life, step by careful step. The world holds darkness in places we least expect, and some monsters wear familiar faces. Awareness, courage, and trusting your instincts can protect you even when evidence is scarce. Survivors may carry fear and memories forever, but strength lies in acknowledging the truth and refusing to let it define who you become. I had always admired my mother, Rachel Whitaker, without question. Growing up in Eugene, Oregon, I watched her every night as she meticulously applied creams, powders, and masks, speaking in that calm, precise tone that made me think everything in the world had an order. She had flawless skin, soft hands, and a presence that filled the house like sunlight streaming through foggy windows. At 17, I still idolized her, even though I sometimes felt stifled by her rules. Lights out by 11, no unsupervised friends, strict curfew, and no wandering outside after dark. It was late autumn of 2020, the kind of cold night where fog curls around streetlights, and every footstep sounds louder than it should. Eugene was quiet, too quiet, and lately that silence made me uneasy. The news had been full of it, murders, dubbed by the local papers as the Stitcher murders, teenagers mostly, disappearing in the shadows. Something about the way these crimes were reported gave me chills, but I never thought, not for a second, that the danger could be closer than the fog-laden streets. That evening, I returned home from my part-time job at the bookstore. The streets were slick with rain, the wind sharp against my face. I expected Mom to be gone, maybe out for her nightly errands, but then I heard it, muffled sobs echoing from the basement. My heart stopped. I whispered, almost too softly to hear myself, "Mom? Is someone down there?" There was no answer, only the sound of something being dragged across the floor. Fear and curiosity collided inside me like two trains on a collision course. I gripped the railing, bare feet on the cold wooden steps, and descended into the dim light of the basement. The bulb flickered, casting long, uneven shadows. I froze. My mother's familiar face was twisted into something unrecognizable, something dark and predatory. She crouched over a teenage girl, one I didn't know, her hands busy with precise movements, draining blood into small glass jars that reflected the dim light. The air smelled sweet, metallic, and I gagged, my stomach twisting violently. Rachel looked up suddenly, her eyes locking on mine. The smile that curled her lips was terrifying, casual, and yet filled with a calm malice I had never seen. "Lena, you shouldn't have come early," she said softly, but I could hear the predatory undertone lurking beneath her words. My legs felt like lead. I couldn't move. Then it clicked. The red masks she had worn during her nightly routines, the ones I had assumed were just beauty rituals, they were made from human blood. My mind raced. I scanned the basement and froze harder. Shelves lined with small glass containers, eyes, teeth, hair, trophies from victims long gone. My mother was a monster, but to her, it was meticulous work, art even. I had no time to think. I grabbed a vial of sleeping powder from the counter, trembling so badly my hands shook. Pouring it into a cup of tea, I whispered under my breath, "Drink," praying it would work. Rachel's eyes narrowed, suspicion flashing for a heartbeat. Then a few minutes later, she collapsed, the calm violence gone, as if it had never been. I ran upstairs immediately, waking my younger brother Tyler. "Tyler, get your coat. We're leaving." My voice was urgent, shaking. Together, we slipped out into the rainy night, the chill and fog doing nothing to wash away the horror I had just witnessed. The police arrived quickly, guided by my frantic call. Rachel was arrested, and for once the news headlines matched reality. The Stitcher murders finally stopped. But even as officers led her away in handcuffs, I knew something about this wouldn't leave me. The basement, the jars, the calm in her eyes, some things lingered beyond the bars of a jail cell. And in the quiet of our home, every shadow seemed heavier, every reflection in the mirror slightly off. The day after Rachel's arrest, I sat on the couch staring at the walls of our home as if seeing them for the first time. It was too quiet. Tyler clung to my side, and I felt responsible for him in a way I hadn't before. "Lena, will she hurt anyone else?" he asked quietly. I hugged him tight. "No. No one else," I lied, though I wasn't entirely sure I believed it. As I wandered through the house, I noticed things I had ignored for years. Tiny glass vials hidden in drawers, a faint metallic scent in the laundry room, journals filled with diagrams and notes on skin, veins, and methods. Every innocent beauty ritual I had admired was tainted now, an act of horror masquerading as perfection. I began to question every interaction, every rule. Her insistence on structure, on control, on perfection. It wasn't just about parenting or skincare. It was about dominance, precision, and secrecy. She had spent years shaping our world, molding perception, keeping the truth hidden in plain sight. The police let me look at the basement again, but it had been cleared. Jars, masks, notes, all gone, catalogued as evidence. The stark emptiness left me with the weight of imagination. I had seen enough to know what was real, but the world outside could never fully grasp the horror that had unfolded here. Even small things haunted me. The way she had smiled while controlling life and death, the meticulous order she maintained while committing murder, the red masks that now seemed grotesque rather than beautiful. I realized trauma wasn't just about what you saw. It was about what you knew was possible. Tyler and I stayed with a family friend for a while. The nights were worst. Every time a shadow crossed the street, every time a stranger knocked on the door, I flinched. I imagined Rachel still watching, still planning, still smiling. I knew that seeing her taken away didn't erase the control she had exercised over our lives. I returned to the house slowly, needing closure, but fearing it at the same time. The basement was sealed, the lock sturdy, but every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of the lights reminded me of her presence. I couldn't trust silence. I couldn't trust stillness. School offered some distraction, but it was impossible to forget. Every reflection in a mirror, every careful glance at the news reminded me that someone I loved could hide something monstrous beneath a smile. The lesson was cruel. Monsters aren't always strangers. Months passed. Rachel's trial became a local spectacle. People were shocked, horrified, and fascinated. I tried to reclaim normalcy, school, friends, homework, but mirrors were my enemies. Every time I brushed my hair or looked into glass, I imagined her eyes staring back at me, calm, methodical, unbroken. Even Tyler asked questions I couldn't fully answer. "Do you think she'll ever come back?" His voice quivered. I hugged him tight, whispering, "No, we're safe now." Though a part of me always doubted. Trauma is not cured by justice alone. I began to write things down, keeping a diary of memories, thoughts, and patterns. It helped, but the basement, the jars, and the masks remained engraved in my mind. I realized survival was not the same as healing. A year later, we moved into a new apartment in another part of Oregon. The air smelled different, fresher, free of metallic undertones. Tyler laughed more easily, and I could sleep without the constant tremor in my chest. But the lessons remained. I watched people more carefully, trusted instincts above appearances, and understood that love and admiration could blind you to darkness. I could never forget my mother's calm cruelty, but I could choose how to live. At night, reflection still caught me off guard. Sometimes I shivered, imagining what might have been, but now I also felt a strange resilience, a knowledge that I had faced something unimaginable and survived. I had reclaimed control over my life, even if some scars were permanent. True evil often hides behind familiar faces and outward perfection. Survival requires vigilance, courage, and the willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. Trauma may linger, but strength comes from acknowledging the darkness, reclaiming your life, and refusing to let fear define your future. I spent 18 years of my life thinking perfection was a standard you had to obey or face consequences. My mother, Angela Dawson, made sure I learned that lesson every single day. From the outside, Maplewood, New Jersey, was the kind of town people bragged about. Manicured lawns, cherry blossoms lining sidewalks, neighbors who waved as you walked past. But our two-story colonial house, pristine and polished as it looked to the world, was a prison I could never escape. Mom was admired in the community. She hosted charity events, coached the local tennis team, and wore a smile that could melt strangers into admiration. She had that charisma, the kind that makes you believe someone is good, kind, untouchable. But inside our walls, her smile was a blade. A misplaced book, a streak of dust, or even the wrong inflection in my voice could ignite fury. I learned to anticipate her moods like a soldier anticipating enemy fire. The meals were timed with military precision. Breakfast at 7, lunch at noon, dinner at 6. Any deviation earned a sharp slap or verbal attack so venomous, I would spend hours trembling on my bed, questioning myself. My father had left after the divorce years ago, leaving me alone with her scrutiny, alone with her obsession with control. I remember one spring evening in 2021 when the cherry blossoms outside swayed gently in the breeze. The town was calm, almost idyllic, but inside the tension was thick enough to choke on. I had spent the entire day at school, then hours cleaning, doing homework, and preparing for my mother's dinner with a few neighbors. I was exhausted, but I took pride in completing everything perfectly, or so I thought. Mom's eyes landed on the TV. A tiny speck of dust clung stubbornly to the corner of the screen. It was insignificant, but she saw it. Her eyes narrowed, sharp as knives. "Emily, did I not tell you that even the smallest imperfection is unacceptable?" Her voice cut across the room, freezing the guests mid-bite. I froze, my stomach knotting. "I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't notice it," I stammered, voice trembling. Her fury erupted. It was not a controlled anger, this was something deeper, darker. She grabbed a kitchen knife from the counter with terrifying speed. Before anyone could react, she lunged. One of the guests, a neighbor who had always treated me kindly, tried to step in. Angela stabbed them. Blood sprayed across the white tile floor, hot and shocking, and the sound of screams filled the air. I didn't think. I ran, socks slipping against the hardwood floors, arms clutching myself to avoid the smell and sight of blood. I bolted out of the house and into the empty streets. The cherry blossoms seemed peaceful now, but I couldn't see beauty in anything. The neighbor had called the police. I collapsed on their doorstep, sobbing uncontrollably, unable to speak. By the time officers arrived, Angela was already screaming my name, her fury and obsession spilling into the night air. I didn't look back. I had survived. But part of me knew this was only the beginning of trauma I couldn't outrun. After Angela's arrest, I moved into a small apartment not far from Maplewood. I wanted independence, freedom, and a life that didn't include walking on eggshells for fear of making someone's temper explode. But escaping her physical presence did not erase the years of psychological control. At first, every shadow was suspicious, every creak in the floor or rustle of paper a potential threat. I flinched at voices behind doors, jump-scared by unexpected touches. Sleep was fitful. Daylight was no sanctuary. Even during simple chores, I imagined my mother's eyes judging, scrutinizing, waiting for a misstep. I began keeping a diary. I wrote every detail of my life, my thoughts, my fears. The act of writing felt like a lifeline, a way to disentangle my mind from the lasting effects of living under constant surveillance and cruelty. I called my best friend Mara nearly every night, talking through nightmares and memories, trying to normalize the chaos that lingered in my mind. The apartment was small but safe. I could lock doors without fearing her will somehow forcing them open. I could cook whatever I wanted, leave things untidy without punishment, and still breathe. And yet, the memories lingered. I would glance at my reflection and see flashes of her face overlaid on my own. Smiling, cold, judging. I would catch my reflection in a store window and flinch, imagining her watching, waiting for me to fail. Even mundane things, checking the stove, folding laundry, unlocking a mailbox, became exercises in self-awareness. I realized trauma isn't just what you survive. It's what you carry with you long after the danger has passed. Months passed. I enrolled in college courses, started working part-time at a cafe, and tried to build a routine. I laughed more freely, and Tyler, my younger cousin who sometimes stayed with me, seemed more relaxed. But the shadow of my mother's obsession never left. One afternoon, as I unpacked boxes from a coat I had donated, a meticulously folded note slipped out from a pocket. I froze. In careful, perfect handwriting it read, "Perfection is always watching." My heart skipped. It was like a physical blow to my chest. I realized with a mixture of horror and clarity that no matter how far I ran, no matter how independent I became, part of her control, her obsession with perfection, had embedded itself into my mind. It had created habits, anxieties, and reflexes that would take years to dismantle. I paced my apartment, heart racing. The note was probably unrelated, a coincidence, but it felt like a message from her, a reminder that perfection, in her twisted sense, was always observing. I forced myself to breathe, to remind myself I was safe now. But the lingering sensation of judgment was real. I could not unlearn it overnight. Nights were hardest. I would wake in cold sweats, haunted by the memory of blood on the kitchen tiles, the way her eyes seemed to pierce through me. Mirrors became instruments of paranoia. Every reflection reminded me of her obsession, her control, and my own vulnerability. I began therapy. The sessions were excruciating, peeling back layers of fear and shame I had carried since childhood. I learned that surviving her wasn't just about physical escape, it was about reclaiming my identity. I learned to notice triggers, to recognize anxious patterns, and to challenge the compulsions she had instilled in me. Gradually, I started setting small boundaries. I left dishes in the sink, skipped perfectly timed chores, and allowed myself to make mistakes without immediate self-flagellation. It was terrifying at first, but each small act of rebellion against ingrained fear was liberating. A year later, I felt more like myself, than I had in nearly 2 decades. The apartment was mine. The streets of Maplewood no longer harbored terror in my mind, and I could breathe without anticipating judgment. Tyler was happier, my friends supportive, and my life slowly felt normal. Yet, perfection's shadow lingered. Occasionally, when folding laundry or arranging a bookshelf, I caught myself holding my breath, remembering her standards. It was a reminder that trauma does not vanish. It transforms, leaving caution and awareness in its wake. I realized that surviving was not enough. Healing required conscious effort, vigilance, and self-compassion. I had reclaimed my life, but part of me remained shaped by what I endured. And maybe that was okay, as long as it strengthened me rather than imprisoned me. Trauma can follow you even after the danger has passed, embedding fear, control, and anxiety into daily life. True freedom is not merely escaping physical harm, but reclaiming your mind, boundaries, and sense of self. Survival is an act of courage, and healing is a continual process of recognizing the past while refusing to let it define your future. I still remember the bitter scent of burnt coffee that morning, clinging to the air like a warning. Dad had been tense for weeks, ever since his business collapsed and creditors started calling. That wasn't unusual for him, but what had changed was the intensity. Everything became a spectacle in his eyes, including us. Me, my little sister Lila, and Mom. We were actors in his obsessive performance, and somehow, we were always failing. It started innocuously. Cameras in the living room, the kitchen, hallways. Dad called it protection, but it didn't feel protective. It felt like surveillance. "You two sit there," he barked one evening, pointing to a corner of the living room. "I need to see how you react when things go wrong. Acting is everything." Mom stayed quiet, sinking into herself more each day. Her eyes seemed hollow, watching us as if she were already planning her escape. Then came the whispers. At first, I blamed my imagination, the old house settling. But one night I heard them clearly outside my locked bedroom door. "Who's there?" I whispered, my voice trembling. Silence. I pressed my ear to the door, heart hammering. I crept downstairs. Every security camera flickered with static except the attic camera. I climbed the narrow stairs. In the corner of shadows, Dad crouched muttering, "It has to be perfect. Betrayal. Perfect plan." Before I could move, he vanished. The living room was empty except for a note on the table. "I'm always watching." For years, Mom had been gone, or at least that's what we were told. Could she have returned? My pulse quickened. If Dad was gone, maybe the real danger had changed, and the house itself felt alive, whispering threats in every creak. After that night, the air in the house felt heavy. Every door creaked, every shadow seemed alive. I started noticing things. Doors unlocked when I was sure I'd locked them. Items moved from where I left them. My brain screamed it was paranoia, but my gut told me someone was inside. Dad's obsession had left me hyper-aware. I installed my own cameras, small, hidden ones, and began keeping a journal. Every oddity, every missing object, every whisper. Lila stopped asking questions. She just followed me, whispering her fear when she thought I wouldn't hear. One afternoon, I found Dad's old laptop buried under newspapers in the attic. It had files, hours of edited videos of us, clips twisted to make us look incompetent, scared, or cruel. My stomach churned. The man I'd grown up fearing had been shaping our lives like a director in a horror film. I confronted Mom's absence. Letters, phone calls, and even hired private investigators led nowhere. And yet, I kept feeling watched. Whoever was leaving notes, whatever, or whoever, was in the shadows. It wasn't Dad. Then I saw it. One night on a camera feed. A figure, familiar in posture, moving silently. Hair tied back, small frame, deliberate steps. My heart froze. Mom? Could it really be her? I ran to the spot the camera had captured, but the figure was gone, leaving only a scrap of paper. Not everything is as it seems. The revelation unsettled me more than Dad ever did. My family history wasn't just broken, it was living, breathing, and plotting. I started digging into Mom's life before her disappearance. Bills, her social media, old friends, nothing made sense. But patterns emerged. She'd been meticulous, patient, planning. Dad had always been violent, cruel, unstable. If anyone were capable of surviving him and turning the tables, it was Mom. One evening, the whispers returned. I followed them into the basement. Boxes of old possessions littered the floor. A photo album hidden beneath heavy blankets revealed Mom's careful observations of Dad's decline. Notes about arguments, threats, and even Dad's obsession with filming everything. It hit me then. Mom hadn't left because she gave up. She had vanished to survive, to learn, to wait. And now she was back, not to reconcile, but to take control, using Dad's reputation as the perfect mask. I felt a mix of relief and terror. Relief that Dad wasn't lurking, but terror that Mom had become something unrecognizable. Someone I didn't know. Someone beyond my understanding. The first note I found from her in weeks read, "I'm closer than you think. Trust no one. Not even your memories." I panicked, unsure if this was a game or a warning. Then I saw her, standing in the doorway, eyes sharp, quiet. "You knew he would ruin everything," she said softly. "I couldn't let that happen. He's gone, but the world remembers him." "Mom," I whispered, feeling a storm of emotions, anger, fear, relief. "You left me. You left us." "I left to protect you," she said, calm but firm. "And now, I need you to understand that protection sometimes doesn't look like what you expect." Her plan was meticulous. Every letter, every whisper, every hint of danger had been orchestrated to ensure Dad's legacy couldn't hurt us. It wasn't cruelty. It was justice, twisted and precise. It took weeks to rebuild the house of my life, both literally and emotionally. Lila returned to normal routines. Dad's threats no longer haunted the walls. Mom stayed close but invisible, guiding without intrusion. I learned to sleep again, to trust again. The house, once a cage of fear and obsession, became a home filled with caution and understanding. I realized that life was fragile, and control could be a weapon if left unchecked. One night I found a final note from Mom. "Survival isn't about hiding. It's about knowing when to act." I smiled faintly, finally understanding. Sometimes the greatest dangers come not from outside, but from those we trust or fear. True protection often requires courage, foresight, and patience. And in life, control is a fragile illusion. Letting go, observing, and acting wisely can save not only ourselves but those we love. Dad was a celebrated theater actor once, someone whose name drew applause and admiration. The kind of man who could make an audience weep with a single glance, whose presence filled a room. But obsession, it destroyed him. After a disastrous performance that went viral for all the wrong reasons, he spiraled, clinging to the idea that life itself was a stage and he was its master director. Growing up, our lives became his scripts. Mom, Lila, and I weren't just family. We were his cast, and every day was a rehearsal he refused to end. Cameras appeared everywhere. The living room, the kitchen, the hallway. At first, Dad called it practice, training us to respond naturally under scrutiny. But soon, it was more than that. "You're too stiff here," he'd critique over dinner, pointing at Lila's posture. "You hesitate, like you're hiding fear. Fear is vital. It shows authenticity." I hated it. Every glance, every casual gesture, became fodder for his analysis. Photographs taken without our knowledge lined the walls of his study, each annotated with cryptic notes. Test loyalty, observe reaction, measure hesitation. Mom tried to intervene. "This isn't healthy," she'd whisper in the kitchen, voice trembling. "You're turning them into experiments." Dad laughed, a sharp, hollow sound. Experiments? No, it's art. Life is art, Margaret. You'll see one day. It wasn't until I reached 16 that I fully understood the gravity of his obsession. One night I wandered into the basement, always locked, always off limits. That evening, the door was slightly ajar. Curiosity got the better of me. As I descended the steps, the smell of dust and old wood mingled with a strange metallic scent. The basement had been transformed into a stage. Childhood traumas were meticulously recreated. The cracked wall where I fell off my bike. The dented dresser where Dad punished me for lying. A single chair under a spotlight where I'd been forced to confess imagined sins. Dolls with my likeness sat on shelves, their eyes eerily lifelike, staring at me. Footsteps echoed behind me. Panic gripped my chest. I spun around, but no one was there. Hello? My voice barely carried over the silence. The lights flickered, and shadows danced across the walls. I rushed up the stairs only to find the main floor strangely empty. Dad had vanished, but he wasn't the only one. The next morning, the house felt heavier. I checked the cameras, but all the footage was corrupted, static eating away frames like a digital cancer. My parents seemed distant, Mom more so than ever, quiet and withdrawn. But Dad didn't appear in any recording. He hadn't left a note, hadn't called, just gone. At first I convinced myself he had stepped out for groceries, rehearsals, some mundane excuse. But the air of dread lingered, an invisible stage surrounding me. I started documenting everything, every strange noise, every missing object, every sensation of being watched. Lila joined reluctantly, whispering fears she wouldn't say aloud. A week passed. Then, at night, I heard voices in the basement. Low murmurs, rhythmic chanting almost. My hands trembled as I descended with a flashlight. The basement looked different. Where childhood traumas had been recreated, now there were rows of chairs facing a makeshift stage. Figures in hooded robes sat silently, faces hidden, eyes fixed on the empty chair under the spotlight. I froze. My chest tightened. "Who are you?" I demanded. Silence. Then a whisper, soft, almost teasing. "The performance continues." I bolted. Upstairs, I found Mom in the kitchen. "Do you know what's happening?" I asked. Her eyes widened and she shook her head slowly. I don't. But I felt it too. Something's wrong. It wasn't just Dad anymore. Whoever, or whatever, had taken over his work, his obsession, his experiments. They weren't going to stop. Over the next few nights, the sounds intensified. Footsteps pacing the hallways. Whispers in languages I didn't understand. The faint rustle of papers, like scripts being edited in real time. I tried to leave the house once, but the doors wouldn't unlock, as if the house itself was complicit. I started noticing things I hadn't before. Photographs of strangers in the frames Dad had kept for family pictures, scribbled notes in the margins of his old scripts. Observe reaction. Fear is genuine when unprovoked. Loyalty is fragile. One night, I returned to the basement with a crowbar, desperate for answers. The lights flickered, revealing figures moving like marionettes. As I stepped closer, I recognized the familiar cadence of Dad's voice on a recorder. Fear is the ultimate truth. Pain is the lens. Witness them, shape them, control them. I realized the horror. Dad had been dead for months. The voice, the notes, the recordings, they were all posthumous. And these strangers, this cult, were continuing his work, rehearsing our lives as if we were unwilling actors in a never-ending play. My sense of reality began to fracture. I'd walk into rooms and find them rearranged to mimic scenes from my childhood. Sometimes I would see a figure in the corner, shrouded, faceless, but somehow familiar, moving just at the edge of my vision. I confronted Mom. "This isn't just Dad. It's people. Cult members. They've taken over the house, our lives, everything." She hugged me tightly. "I know. I've seen them too. We have to survive, not fight blindly. You remember what he taught us. The lessons buried in the fear, the patterns. We have to use that knowledge now, using everything Dad had drilled into me, the cues, the timing, the behavioral patterns. I started to anticipate their movements. I learned to navigate the house at night without being seen, to avoid their cameras, to remain unseen. Survival was a performance, and I had to be the ultimate actor. The night I decided to end it, I returned to the basement for the last confrontation. The cult was there, the empty chair under the spotlight glowing ominously. I stepped forward, confident now in my understanding of the performance. "You don't control me anymore," I shouted. Silence. Then the whispers. "The audience demands perfection." I realized something crucial. Dad had died, but obsession didn't. Obsession had become a living entity, carried on by those who worshipped it, and I couldn't destroy it with anger or fear. I could only survive by recognizing the truth. Control was never theirs to wield. I escaped that night, careful, deliberate, leaving the basement empty, leaving the house behind. I walked into the street, the cold air biting, and I finally felt a sense of freedom. The shadows of Dad's obsession would always linger, but I had reclaimed my life, my mind, my reality. Obsession, unchecked, can consume not only the one who wields it, but everyone in their orbit. True control comes not from domination but from self-awareness, courage, and the willingness to step away from destructive patterns before they define you. Life is not a stage to manipulate. It is a reality to live fully, freely, and responsibly. When I first moved into the apartment on West Haverford, I told myself it was exactly what I needed. A place stripped of sentiment, stripped of memory, stripped of her. After my divorce, I wanted anonymity. I wanted a roof that wasn't heavy with history. The building wasn't much. Peeling paint, flickering lights, the faint smell of mildew that clung to the stairwell like a wet rag. But it was cheap, and I was desperate. The landlord, a gruff man in his 60s named Ed, handed me the keys without ceremony. "Quiet place," he said. "Neighbors keep to themselves. That's what you wanted, right?" "Yeah," I muttered. "Quiet's fine." The first night I unpacked a few boxes, drank too much whiskey, and collapsed on the mattress I'd dragged in. At 2 a.m, I woke to a sound I couldn't place. At first I thought it was the pipes clanging, or someone arguing through thin walls. But then I heard it again. Muffled screaming. Not just yelling. Panic. Pleading. A woman's voice rising and falling like she was trapped on the other side of the wall. I froze. Heart pounding. Divorce had left me jumpy, raw. Maybe my mind was playing tricks. I sat there, ears straining, until I convinced myself it was a dream. The next night it came again, same time. Screams, then hurried footsteps, then silence so sharp it made my teeth ache. I called the police. 2 officers knocked on the door next to mine, listened, then shrugged. "Place is empty," one said. "Hasn't been rented in years." "That's impossible," I said. "I heard someone in there." They exchanged a look. "Sir, maybe you should get some rest." I didn't sleep after that. By day, the apartment seemed normal enough. I'd make coffee, stare at the blank walls, and tell myself I was imagining things. I was 43, alone, and still paying alimony I could barely afford. Stress could explain a lot. But at night, when the screams returned, I pressed my ear against the wall and felt my stomach twist. It wasn't imagination. Something was happening in there. I started recording the sounds on my phone. The first few nights, the audio was faint, almost useless. But by the 5th night, the microphone caught it clear. Pounding fists, a cry for help, the voice breaking into sobs. I played it back again and again, hands shaking. Proof. Finally. The next morning, I went to Ed. "You told me that apartment was empty," I said, shoving my phone toward him. He didn't even listen, just waved me off. "Sir, I'm not entertaining ghost stories. That unit's been boarded up since '09. If you don't like it here, you can leave, but don't bother me with this again." Ghost stories. I wanted to argue, but his eyes had already moved past me. I walked back to my apartment, recorder still in my hand, and thought about how easy it was to dismiss someone. How easy it had been for my ex-wife to dismiss me, too. That night, when the screams came again, I sat on the edge of my bed and whispered through the wall, "I hear you." By the second week, the apartment was swallowing me whole. I stopped going into the office except when I absolutely had to. My boss left curt voicemails. "Carlos, deadlines don't wait for personal issues." My co-workers whispered in the hallways when I did show up, eyes darting away when I looked. The sleeplessness was etched into my face. The noise came every night, always close to 2 in the morning. Sometimes it was footsteps racing across the wooden floor, sometimes pounding fists, sometimes screams so sharp I wanted to tear the drywall down with my hands. I started knocking on the neighbor's door, first politely, then louder. "I know you're in there," I shouted. "Say something." Silence. One afternoon, when the sun slanted across the hallway, I swore I saw something. A faint, bloody handprint smeared across the doorframe. I blinked, and it was gone. I told myself it was stress, that my mind was inventing things, but a deeper fear curled inside me. What if it wasn't the building? What if it was me? My ex-wife's lawyer called that same week. "Mr. Hicks, you're 2 months behind on alimony. This can't continue." I almost laughed. My ex took everything and still wanted more. I slammed the phone down and paced the apartment, chest tight. That night, I hit record again. The screams came, louder than ever, a woman sobbing, begging, then pounding. I gripped the recorder like it was a lifeline. When the noise stopped, I sat in silence, shaking, staring at the wall. In the morning, I went back to Ed's office. "Listen to this," I demanded, pressing play. He didn't even flinch. "You think you're the first tenant who's heard things in this building?" he said flatly. "Old pipes, rats, buildings make noise." "This isn't rats," I snapped. "This is a woman screaming for her life." "Get some sleep, Hicks." He shut the door in my face. Sleep. That was the one thing I couldn't do. I started drinking more, whiskey blurring the edges of my fear, but the noise always came back, slicing through the haze. One night, I saw a shadow stretch beneath the neighbor's door. Long, too long, spilling across the hallway like a stain. I stumbled back into my apartment, slammed the door, and pressed my back against it, shaking. I wasn't crazy. I couldn't be. The night I broke in, it wasn't planned. Not really. The screams had been relentless, each one slamming against my skull until I felt like the walls themselves were vibrating. I grabbed the crowbar I kept by the bed, left over from my construction days, and stormed into the hallway. The lock on the neighbor's door was rusty, brittle. It gave way with a sharp crack. Inside, the air was stale, heavy with mold. The floorboards creaked under my weight. Bare walls, no furniture, no signs of life. Just rot and silence. I laughed, a broken sound. Maybe I was insane after all. Maybe the divorce, the stress, the loneliness had chewed through my sanity. Then I remembered the recorder in my pocket. I pressed play. The voice that spilled out made my knees buckle. "Carlos, please stop. Don't do this." My ex-wife. Her voice clear as day, begging. I stumbled against the wall, bile rising in my throat. I hadn't heard that voice in years, not like that. Not with terror in it. Memories clawed up from the dark, her eyes wide with fear. My hand raised. The night she left. The fight that ended everything. I'd buried it deep, told myself it was just anger, just words. But now, hearing her voice, I wasn't sure anymore. The walls weren't haunted. The building wasn't cursed. It was me. I stopped recording after that night. I didn't need proof anymore. The proof was already inside me. Still, the screams came. Not just at 2 a.m. anymore. Sometimes at dusk, sometimes in the middle of the afternoon, seeping through the walls like the building itself wanted to remind me. I quit my job. Couldn't face the stares, the whispers. My world shrank to 4 mold-stained walls, a bottle of whiskey, and the voice that wouldn't stop. "Carlos, please stop." Sometimes I shouted back, "I didn't mean to." Other times I pressed my forehead to the wall and whispered, "I'm sorry." But the voice never answered, only screamed, only begged. Neighbors started avoiding me in the hallway. I caught one woman whispering to another, "That's the guy from 3C, stares at walls, talks to himself." I wanted to tell them the truth, but what truth was there? That the building was replaying my sins? That I'd buried something so deep even I couldn't face it until now? One night I woke to find the handprints again, this time not faint. This time smeared across my own walls, red and dripping, vanishing when I blinked, but leaving the smell of iron in the air. I dropped to my knees, clutching my head. I wasn't sure if I was seeing ghosts or just my guilt rotting me from the inside out. But I knew this. There was no escape. The last straw came when I found the crowbar leaning against my bed, streaked with something dark. I hadn't touched it since that night, but there it was, heavy and accusing. I tried scrubbing it clean. The stain didn't fade. I staggered to the neighbor's door, pressed my palms flat against it and whispered, "What do you want from me?" The silence answered with a scream so loud it rattled my teeth. My own scream echoed back at me, twisted into hers. I ran back inside, tore open the bottle, drank until the world spun. But the voice didn't fade. It grew louder, clearer. "Carlos, please stop." I smashed the recorder against the wall, but the sound kept playing in my head. I realized then the truth I'd been running from. The apartment wasn't cursed. The neighbor wasn't real. The voice wasn't a ghost. It was memory. My own crime clawing its way back. The door next to mine had never been locked from the outside. It had been locked from within, by me. Now the walls were bleeding it out. You can move, you can drink, you can bury your past beneath layers of denial, but the truth will always find a way back. Guilt is its own haunting, and the deeper you hide it, the louder it screams. Long before I could remember birthdays, holidays, or even my first day of school, there was a single memory that carved itself into me like it was waiting for the years to come. I was 5, maybe a little younger. I woke up in that pale hour before dawn, when the world feels wrong and too quiet. I remember rolling over in bed and seeing him, a man at my window, bald head, skin pale under the moonlight, and those eyes, sharp, unnatural blue. They glowed like glass reflecting headlights, though there were none outside. His face was pressed against the glass, fog spreading from his breath. I screamed. I don't remember climbing out of bed or running. I just remember my mother's arms around me. She pulled me close, whispering it was only a dream, a nightmare, nothing to be scared of. She tucked me back in, closed the curtains tight, kissed my forehead. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But the image didn't fade. For years after, I slept with my curtains pulled shut, even on the hottest summer nights. My twin brother, Caleb, used to tease me for it. "Afraid of the boogeyman?" He'd laugh, letting his own window stay open so the crickets sang him to sleep. My sister Rachel rolled her eyes whenever I brought it up. I learned not to. My dad didn't like weakness. He was strict in that way. No crying over scraped knees, no whining when it thundered. To him, fear was a thing you wrestled down until it went quiet. So I buried that night. I labeled it a nightmare and pretended it never really happened. But there's a difference between forgetting and forcing yourself not to think. Every time the house creaked, every time the trees tapped the siding, every time headlights swept across my wall, I felt those eyes, watching, waiting. We grew up in a small neighborhood just outside Baltimore, the kind of street where people left their doors unlocked, where kids played stickball in the road and nobody worried. My father's job with the Postal Service kept us steady. My mom was the softer balance, always reminding us that life wasn't just rules and discipline. Still, I never told either of them how that face followed me into my dreams for years. When I hit middle school, I convinced myself I was past it. People outgrow their childhood fears. That's what I told myself anyway. I buried it deep. Until much later, when it came back sharper than ever, and I learned the worst part. It hadn't been a dream at all. I was 23 when the memory clawed its way back to the surface. My father had fallen ill. Lung cancer. By the time we got him into a hospital in Bogota, Colombia, where he had retired with my mother after selling the house, he was already a shadow of himself. We sat in that sterile waiting room with its humming fluorescent lights and white walls that smelled of bleach and sickness. Rachel was 28 then, Caleb 23 like me. We hadn't been in the same room in years. We tried small talk to fill the silence. Work, relationships, anything but the fact that our father was dying down the hall. At one point, I don't know why, I mentioned the nightmare. Maybe because being back together stirred old memories. Maybe because the smell of antiseptic made me feel 5 again. "Remember when I swore there was a guy at my window?" I said, half laughing. Scared the hell out of me. Caleb chuckled, shaking his head. "Yeah, you were such a scaredy cat. Curtains closed, lights on, stuffed animals lined up like soldiers." I expected Rachel to smirk the way she always had. Instead, her expression froze. Her smile vanished. She stared at me, then at the floor. "That wasn't a dream," she said quietly. The air went heavy. I blinked at her, not sure I'd heard right. "What do you mean?" I asked. She swallowed, glanced around like she wasn't sure if she should keep going. Then she told us. She had been 9 or 10 then. She heard the scraping at her own window first. When she looked up, there he was, a bald man with those same awful eyes. He was prying at the frame, trying to force it open. She screamed, and our dad came running. He threw open her door, saw the man, and charged outside. Rachel said she remembered hearing shouting, the sound of feet pounding the grass, and then silence. When the police arrived, the man was gone, swallowed by the woods behind our yard. Hours later, after the adrenaline cooled, Dad checked every window. That's when he saw the marks on mine. The scratches where someone had tried the lock. The only thing that saved me was the latch holding firm. My stomach knotted. All my life I'd convinced myself it was just a nightmare. But it wasn't. The face at the glass was real. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" I whispered. Rachel's eyes softened. "You were 5. Dad didn't want you living in fear. He told us never to bring it up again." I leaned back in my chair, dizzy. Caleb stared at her like she'd just confessed to murder. None of us spoke for a while after that. The beeping of machines down the hall filled the silence. My skin felt too tight, like I was 5 again, waiting for those eyes to blink. Our father never mentioned it again before he passed. I'll never know if he chased that man far, or if the man just walked calmly into the woods knowing he'd be back one day. After the funeral, I couldn't shake the feeling. I flew back home, tried to return to work, tried to act normal, but something in me was rattled loose. I found myself avoiding windows again, pulling curtains shut even in the middle of the day. I told myself it was old paranoia returning, nothing more. But then the dreams started. The first one came a week after I returned. I woke in my apartment drenched in sweat. In the dream, I had been back in my childhood room. I could hear the scraping at the window, slow and deliberate. When I turned my head, he was there. Same bald head, same piercing eyes. Only this time he wasn't outside. He was standing in my room. His shadow fell across my bed. I tried to scream, but no sound came. He leaned closer, so close I could feel his breath on my cheek. When I woke, my throat was raw from yelling. My neighbor banged on the wall telling me to shut up. It didn't stop. Night after night, the same dream. The man always closer, always silent, always waiting. I didn't tell anyone. Who would believe me? Caleb thought I was overdramatic when we were kids. Rachel had her own family to care about. I carried it alone, just like before. One night, though, it got worse. I jolted awake around 3 a.m., heart racing. My apartment was silent, but when I looked toward the window, I swore I saw the faintest outline of a figure retreating from the glass. I stumbled to the curtains, yanked them open. Nothing. Empty street, shadows of trees swaying under the streetlight. The next morning I found faint scratches on the outside of the frame. I told myself it had to be the wind, a branch, anything but him. But deep down, I knew. Paranoia became my shadow. I changed apartments, installed cameras, slept with a baseball bat within reach. Still the dreams came. Still the memories grew sharper, like my mind was refusing to let me soften them anymore. One evening, Caleb called. "You've been weird lately," he said. "You okay?" I hesitated. Then I told him everything. The dreams, the scratches, the feeling that the man was still out there. Caleb sighed. "You're scaring yourself, man. Dad chased that guy off decades ago. He's probably long dead." "Then why do I still see him?" I snapped. "Why do I wake up feeling like he's breathing down my neck?" Silence on the line. Then Caleb said quietly, "Because you never dealt with it. You buried it. Now it's eating you alive." Maybe he was right. Or maybe he wanted to believe it was all in my head. A month later, Rachel called me out of the blue. "I've been thinking about that night," she admitted. "I can't get his face out of my mind either. Do you think he ever came back?" Her voice shook. That scared me more than anything. If Rachel, the one who always rolled her eyes, admitted she was afraid, then maybe it wasn't just me. I didn't answer her question. Some things don't have answers. The last time I saw him, or thought I did, was 3 months ago. I was in a cheap motel outside Richmond, traveling for work. The walls were thin, the air smelled of mold. I couldn't sleep. Around 2 a.m., I turned over, and there he was. Not outside, not in a dream. Standing in the corner of the room, bald, blue-eyed, silent. I blinked, and he was gone. Just shadows. But when I turned on the light, I saw something scratched into the cheap wooden dresser. 4 words. "I never left you." I checked out before sunrise, drove home shaking, and sat in my car until daylight. Since then, I haven't seen him, but I feel him. Every creak of my apartment floor. Every shadow at the edge of my vision. I don't know if he was ever just a man. Maybe he was. Maybe he's long gone, and it's my mind replaying a wound that never healed. Or maybe he's still out there, watching, waiting, like he always has. I lock my windows every night. Curtains drawn tight, just like when I was 5. And I wonder if someday I'll wake to find those blue eyes again, not in memory, not in dreams, but standing over me. Trauma left unspoken never truly disappears. Silence doesn't erase fear, it only gives it room to grow. Facing what haunts us, whether real or in memory, is the only way to stop it from following us forever. I used to think of myself as reliable. That was the word people at the office used when they talked about me. Hector, the reliable one. I stayed late. I kept my head down. I double-checked other people's reports when they missed something. I laughed at their dumb jokes even when they weren't funny. For 10 years, I built my reputation on being dependable. And then one afternoon, in the middle of a quarterly meeting, I hurled a chair across the room. I still don't know what set me off. Someone corrected a number on my slide, and my hand started shaking. My throat burned, and before I knew it, I was screaming. Spit flew from my mouth. I told him he didn't know a damn thing, that none of them did. The chair clattered off the whiteboard and dropped with a bang that silenced the whole floor. They sent me home that day. HR called the next morning. 2 options: resign quietly or agree to therapy, with written proof that I was attending. I wanted to tell them to shove it, but I didn't have savings to fall back on. So I nodded into the phone, agreed to therapy, and told myself I'd treat it like another work assignment. That's how I ended up in Dr. Lyle's office, sweating through my shirt, sitting in a soft armchair that felt like it might swallow me. The place smelled faintly of cinnamon, like a candle had been burning earlier. The blinds were half closed, and a clock on the wall ticked louder than it should have. "Why don't you tell me what you've been seeing?" he asked, pen scratching against his pad. "They're not real," I said quickly. "Just stress visions. I know what's happening to me. I've been under pressure, that's all." "What kind of visions?" I stared at my shoes. The laces were frayed. I didn't want to say it out loud, but I had to. People without faces. Long hallways that never end. And this woman, I cleared my throat. Her hands are covered in blood. She whispers my name. Dr. Lyle didn't blink. He leaned forward slightly. "What does she say?" The words stuck in my throat. Finally, I whispered, "She says, you promised you'd never forget." He nodded, jotting it down. "I'd like you to start keeping a journal. Write everything down, the dreams, the visions, the feelings. Don't censor yourself." "Can you do that?" I agreed, even though I felt ridiculous. Writing nightmares in a notebook wasn't going to change anything. But I was desperate to keep my job, so I left with a spiral pad tucked under my arm and the sour taste of shame in my mouth. That night, I dreamed of her again, the woman with the blood-soaked hands. She stood at the foot of my bed, whispering the same words. When I woke up, my sheets were damp with sweat, and the clock read 3:17 a.m. I sat at the kitchen table under the yellow light, opened the notebook and wrote everything down, every detail I could remember. My handwriting shook across the page. It was only the beginning. The journal filled faster than I expected. Every night I woke at strange hours, and every night she was there. Sometimes standing in the corner, sometimes inches from my face. Always whispering, always with her dripping hands. I tried to convince myself it was all stress, but the entries piled up, page after page of the same figure, the same message. At our next session, Dr. Lyle read my notes carefully, nodding as though everything made perfect sense. "You're processing," he said. "That's good, but I want you to take it a step further." "What do you mean?" "Draw them." I barked out a laugh. "I'm not an artist." "Doesn't matter. Sometimes images speak clearer than words. Draw what you see." So I did. At first the sketches were crude. Stick figures with smudges where their faces should be, scribbles for hallways. But the more I tried, the sharper they became. My hand moved with a confidence I didn't recognize. The faceless people turned eerily lifelike, as though I had seen them standing right in front of me. And the woman. God, the woman. Her eyes bulged with fury, her hair matted across her cheeks, her mouth frozen in a scream that never ended. The worst part was the blood on her hands. I could see the glisten of it, even though the drawing was nothing but pencil and paper. I started hearing noises in my apartment. Pages rustling when the windows were shut. Footsteps in the kitchen at night. Once I woke to the sound of whispering, and when I sat up, the sketches I'd left on the coffee table fluttered, as though someone had just touched them. I tried telling myself it was exhaustion, but the fear grew sharp and constant. I began to dread the sessions, yet I also needed them. I wanted answers. One night I walked into my living room and froze. Dr. Lyle was standing there. He hadn't knocked. He hadn't called. He was just there, flipping through my drawings with an expression I couldn't read. "What the hell are you doing here?" I shouted. He looked up slowly. His voice was calm. Too calm. "These aren't hallucinations, Hector." My skin prickled. "What are you talking about?" "These are memories," he said. "You didn't imagine them. You buried them." I laughed, but it came out cracked and desperate. "That's insane." He closed the notebook with a snap. "You killed her, your girlfriend, the woman with the bloody hands. You beat her in a jealous rage, and then you forced yourself to forget." The room tilted around me. My chest tightened. "That's not true," I whispered. "I loved her." But then, from the corner of the room, a whisper slid against my ear. "You promised you'd never forget." I turned and she was there. I hit the floor hard, knees cracking against the wood. She was standing only a few feet away, dripping hands leaving dark streaks down her thighs. My heart hammered against my ribs. "This isn't real," I muttered. "You're not real." But she stepped closer. Her eyes glistened, and when she opened her mouth, a rush of air brushed against my face. "Remember?" I clutched my head, squeezing my temples until spots danced in my vision. "No, it's not possible." Dr. Lyle didn't move. He just stood there, arms folded, watching me unravel. His voice was low but steady. "Tell me what you see, Hector." I screamed at him, begged him to make her go away, but he only repeated the question. Finally, words spilled from me, broken and frantic. She was screaming at me. She accused me of cheating. She wouldn't stop. I pushed her, but I didn't. My voice cracked. Memories flooded like broken glass, cutting their way through. The night in the apartment, her voice raised, my fists clenching, the sound of her head striking the edge of the coffee table. I stumbled backward, shaking my head violently. "It was an accident. I didn't mean to." Her bloody hands reached toward me. The smell of iron filled my nose. I gagged. "You didn't call for help," Dr. Lyle said flatly. "You wrapped her in a blanket. You put her in the trunk of your car. You drove her out past the quarry." "How do you know that?" I screamed. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a leather badge wallet. The glint of metal caught my eye. "A detective's badge." "Because we've been investigating you for a long time. The therapy wasn't treatment, Hector. It was interrogation." My body went cold. The drawings on the table blurred, faces swirling into pools of blood. My head pounded. I couldn't breathe. The weeks that followed were a blur of interviews and locked rooms. I barely remember the ride downtown. They said I confessed half a dozen times. Sometimes I swore it was an accident. Other times I insisted it never happened at all. They showed me photographs of the quarry. A mound of dirt disturbed. Fragments of cloth that matched the blanket I remembered. My signature on credit card statements from the gas station I'd stopped at that night. The hardest part was the journal. Every entry I thought was describing visions, dreams, hallucinations. It all read like a confession now. Page after page of faceless people, endless hallways, a woman with bloodied hands. A prosecutor could wave it in front of a jury and not even need to say a word. The detectives asked me about the whispers, the hallucinations, and I didn't know how to answer. Were they memories? Guilt? Ghosts? Even sitting in that gray room under fluorescent lights, I could still hear her voice sometimes, brushing against my ear. "You promised you'd never forget." I thought jail would silence it, but it didn't. Nights were the worst. The concrete walls around my cot stretched into long hallways when I blinked. My cellmate asked me once why I muttered in my sleep. I told him I was talking to myself, but really I was bargaining with her shadow. Dr. Lyle, or Detective Lyle I should say, visited only once after the arrest. He didn't sit across from me with his notebook. He stood on the other side of the glass with his arms folded, expression unreadable. "You wanted the truth," he said through the phone. "Now you have it." I couldn't answer. My throat closed. All I could do was hang up the phone and press my forehead against the glass, waiting for her whisper to fade. It never did. The trial lasted months. They paraded the evidence, journals, sketches, testimony from neighbors who heard fights through the walls. They painted me as a jealous, violent man who snapped. Maybe they were right. The jury didn't take long. Guilty. Second-degree murder. I sit here now in a cell that smells of disinfectant and sweat. The walls are blank, but I can still see the claw marks of my own memory etched across them. The other inmates ignore me mostly. They don't know that when I close my eyes, I see her standing at the foot of my bed, blood dripping, whispering those words. Sometimes I wonder if she's a ghost, or just the part of me that still remembers what I tried to bury. It doesn't matter anymore. She won't let me forget, and maybe that's the punishment I deserve more than bars or chains. I started writing again. Not drawings this time, just words. honest ones. The pages don't make sense half the time, but I write anyway. Maybe it's the only way to stay sane. Maybe it's the only way to face what I did. When the lights go out at night and the hallways stretch in my mind, I hear her whisper. And now, for the first time, I answer her. I say, I remember. The story of Hector Bell shows how denial can be more dangerous than guilt itself. The mind will bury memories too painful to face, but the truth has a way of clawing back. Pretending the past never happened doesn't erase it. It only gives it more power. Facing our actions, no matter how dark, is the only path to freedom. Otherwise, the ghosts we try to silence will whisper forever. I first saw him online. Not on a dating app, but through a mutual friend's comment thread that spiraled into private messages. His profile looked like something out of a travel magazine. Photos in Portugal, stone alleys, waves crashing against cliffs, Wilton leaning against a faded blue door with the ease of someone who belonged there. His captions were thoughtful, like journal entries written for strangers. He quoted poets in English, Portuguese, and Spanish. He wrote about family, about resilience, about how women shaped him since he was the youngest of 3 sisters. He reached out casually at first, complimenting a post I'd made about work. Your words carry warmth, he wrote. A little pretentious, maybe, but in the haze of late nights and loneliness, I answered. The messages became longer, flowing into paragraphs about philosophy, about travel, about fate. His English was nearly flawless, just touched with an accent that came alive in voice notes. I listened to them in bed, eyes closed, smiling at the way he said my name. His voice was like velvet dipped in sincerity. I told myself to be careful. I wasn't naive, but he seemed different. He didn't push for anything physical right away. He asked about my childhood, my favorite books, the things I was most ashamed of. And when I told him, he never judged. He responded with stories of his own. Parents who fought, a father who sometimes disappeared, sisters who taught him empathy. We met for dinner after a month of talking. He chose the place, a quiet little Italian restaurant tucked between warehouses, a spot I'd never noticed before. When I arrived, he was already there wearing a pressed shirt that looked expensive. He stood, kissed my cheek, pulled out my chair. The night passed in a blur of red wine and pasta I can't remember tasting. He listened to me like I was the only person in the world. When I joked about my clumsiness, he told me I was graceful. When I spoke about my job frustrations, he said I was strong. By the time the bill came, I was floating. He paid in cash, leaving a tip large enough that the waiter returned twice to thank him. Walking to my car, he slipped a small wrapped box into my hand. Inside was a silver charm shaped like a book. Because you're always telling stories, he said, smiling like he already belonged in mine. That was how it began. The first weeks felt like a romance novel. He left handwritten notes in my mailbox, even though he lived across town. He sent morning messages before I woke, as if he had memorized my routine. He surprised me with flowers after a stressful workday, claimed he just felt that I needed them. When I was ambitious, full of energy, he was my cheerleader, telling me I could conquer anything. When I was low, he was gentle, saying he would carry my burdens until I was ready to lift them again. It felt uncanny, the way he mirrored me so perfectly. But small cracks showed. When I asked what he did for work, he grew vague. Remote management, he said, waving his hand as if the details were too boring to bother with. Sometimes he said he worked with finance. Other times, technology. His stories shifted. Once he told me his father had passed away when he was young, shaping him into the man he was. Weeks later, he mentioned an argument with his father over the phone. When I raised an eyebrow, he chuckled softly. Memory lapse. English isn't my first language, remember? He always had an excuse. He claimed he didn't drink, said alcohol clouded judgment, but then posted photos from a vineyard tour in Spain, glass raised high. When I teased him, he laughed it off. Special occasion, I forgot I told you. He was so charming in his apologies that questioning him felt cruel, like I was the one breaking the spell. Then one evening I scrolled through his old photos and saw a woman tagged in several of them. He had once called her a family friend. Something inside me pushed to reach out. I sent her a polite message, half expecting she wouldn't respond. She answered within minutes. Her first line punched me in the chest. That's not his story. That's mine. Her name was Anna. She had been married to him for years. Married. Not dating, not a fling. Married. They'd lived together in Australia until he abandoned her, leaving debts and half-packed boxes behind. She told me he never worked. He drained her savings, convincing her it was temporary, that he was on the brink of starting something big. He manipulated her with love notes, flowers, big speeches about destiny. The same gestures I thought were mine alone, and Anna wasn't the only one. 2 other young women had contacted her after he left. Each told the same story. Wilton promised them the world, moved into their lives, convinced them to fund his lifestyle, leaned on their ambition while offering nothing but words. Then he disappeared when the lies caught up. I read her messages over and over, nausea rising. My silver charm, the dinners, the flowers, all probably paid for by someone else's desperation. I wasn't special. I was part of a rotation. When I confronted him, I expected denial. I expected anger. Instead, he smiled calmly, almost indulgently. People only believe the story they want to hear, he said, sipping his coffee. Which one did you believe? Something inside me cracked then. It wasn't just lies. It was sport. He thrived on watching us unravel, on proving he could bend reality as long as we wanted to be loved. I left without finishing my drink. Blocking him didn't stop him. He appeared outside my office one afternoon, leaning casually against the brick wall holding a gift bag. My stomach dropped as soon as I saw him. He didn't move toward me. He just watched, smiling, as though waiting for me to come to him. I ducked inside and didn't leave until a coworker offered to walk me out hours later. Emails started arriving from names I didn't recognize. Friends who swore Wilton was misunderstood, who begged me to give him another chance. The writing style was identical to his messages. One night I found a bouquet of flowers at my door. No note, but the brand was the same he always bought. I thought about filing a report, but what could I say? A man I dated sent me flowers? Finally, I agreed to meet him in a public cafe, desperate to end it. He looked radiant as ever, his smile perfectly rehearsed. He leaned across the table and whispered promises. Trips to Europe, a wedding, a family. He said the women were bitter, unable to handle his honesty. He said I was different. He always said I was different. But when I mentioned Anna by name, his jaw tightened. His hand twitched. His eyes, once warm, hardened like glass. She's dramatic, he said, voice dropping low. She always ruins things. For the first time, I believed every word Anna had told me. I walked away that night. I blocked him again, changed my locks, stopped posting publicly online. Slowly, he faded into the background, though sometimes I still see echoes. A new friend request from a stranger with familiar blue eyes. A message in broken English that feels too rehearsed. Even now, months later, I sometimes wonder how many more women are tangled in his web. How many are listening to his voice notes in bed, smiling at his promises, believing they're the one who finally matters. The truth is, Wilton doesn't love anyone. He loves the performance, the chase, the unraveling. And when he smiles, it isn't affection, it's victory. Wilton's story is a reminder that charm without consistency is just manipulation in disguise. Real love doesn't need rehearsed lines or shifting stories. It shows itself through honesty and stability. When someone's words feel too perfect but their actions don't match, pay attention. Believing only the story we want to hear leaves us vulnerable to those who thrive on deception. My name is Rachel, and if I had to explain myself in one word, it would be protective. Some people might call it controlling or paranoid or overbearing. But when you raise a child alone, especially after a pregnancy that nearly tore you apart, you learn there's no such thing as too careful. My son Jamie is 6. He's my entire world. The only reason I get out of bed in the morning, and the only thing that keeps me going when I'm too exhausted to keep my eyes open. His father walked out when I was pregnant. There's a whole backstory to that mess, but all you need to know is he didn't want responsibility, and I didn't want my child growing up watching a man resent him. So it's been just the two of us in this small suburb. We have a little rental house with peeling paint and creaky floors. It isn't perfect, but it's ours. I work part-time at the library and pick up bookkeeping jobs from home. Nothing glamorous, but it covers food, rent, and clothes that Jamie will outgrow in 3 months flat. Most days I feel stretched so thin I might snap, but when Jamie laughs, all the cracks in me feel worth it. I thought the hardest part of motherhood was the exhaustion. Sleepless nights, the tantrums, the school drop-offs with a kid clinging to your leg while other parents stared. But the truth is, the hardest part is the constant low hum of fear. Fear that something could happen, that he could get sick or hurt or taken. And I can't lie, I've always been a little high-strung about safety. I lock every door, check every window twice before bed. I memorize the license plates of strange cars parked on the block. It sounds crazy when I say it out loud, but tell me which mother hasn't imagined the worst and then built her life around preventing it. The first time I saw him, the man I came to call the Shadow Man, was at the playground. It was a Saturday morning, bright and warm, the kind of day when every kid in the neighborhood swarms the swings and slides. Jamie was shrieking with laughter on the swings, his skinny legs pumping like he was determined to launch himself to the sky. I sat on a bench nearby, scrolling half distracted through my phone but keeping him in the corner of my eye. That's when I noticed him. He was standing near the tree line, just past the play area. Tall, gaunt, hoodie pulled up over his head even though it wasn't cold. At first I thought he was another parent, maybe someone walking their dog, though I didn't see a leash. But every time I looked up, he slipped back, like he didn't want to be caught watching. I told myself not to overreact. Maybe he was waiting for someone. Maybe he was just a teenager killing time. But when Jamie ran over to me, hair sticking to his sweaty forehead, I pulled him onto my lap and hugged him tighter than usual. That night, Jamie woke screaming. I sprinted into his room, heart in my throat. He was sitting upright in bed, tears streaking his cheeks. "The Shadow Man is in my room," he sobbed, pointing toward the corner. I flipped on the light. The room was empty. The only thing out of place was the window. It was open, even though I'd sworn I shut it earlier. I soothed him the best I could, whispering, "It was just a dream, baby. You're safe." But inside, my stomach was ice, because the look in his eyes wasn't the foggy panic of a nightmare. It was the raw terror of a child who had seen something real. After that night, I couldn't shake the feeling we were being watched. During the day, I told myself I was imagining things. But when Jamie clung to me at bedtime, begging me to keep the lights on, I couldn't dismiss it. At the grocery store, I thought I saw the same man in the parking lot. Hoodie pulled up, standing by a cart corral, staring. By the time I turned my head again, he was gone. At Jamie's school, I lingered by the gate at pickup, scanning every face in the crowd of parents. My heart jumped at shadows. "Rachel, you're wound too tight," one of the other moms told me when I confessed I felt uneasy. She laughed it off, said motherhood made everyone paranoid. Maybe she was right. But that didn't explain Jamie waking up night after night, sobbing that the Shadow Man was back. Finally, I bought cameras. 4 little black domes, 1 for the living room, 1 in the hallway, and 2 outside the house. I told myself it was just precaution. If someone was creeping around, I'd have proof. The first week, nothing. Just grainy footage of me microwaving leftovers or Jamie sprawled on the couch with cartoons. But one night, unable to sleep, I pulled up the feed on my phone. At first it looked normal. Then I noticed movement. A figure, sitting on the couch, while I was asleep upstairs. My blood turned cold. I scrubbed back through the recording. There it was again. A figure standing in Jamie's room, brushing a hand over his hair. I bolted down the hall, flung open his door. He was asleep, chest rising and falling peacefully. The room was empty. The next morning I took the footage to the police. The officer barely looked at it before giving me a practiced smile. "Stress, ma'am. Being a single mom is hard. Your mind can play tricks." Looks like static to me. I wanted to scream. Static? It was clear as day. A person, but I left with nothing but a pamphlet about coping with anxiety. By then I was convinced the Shadow Man wasn't just in Jamie's nightmares. He was here, in our lives, waiting for a moment when I slipped. And I swore I wouldn't let that happen. It happened on a Thursday evening. I was making pasta in the kitchen, humming to myself to drown out the quiet. Jamie was in his room coloring. I left him alone for less than 10 minutes. When I went to check, the room was empty. My heart seized. I tore through the house, calling his name, voice breaking. No answer. I ran into the yard, shouting until neighbors stepped outside. "Have you seen Jamie?" My legs barely carried me as I searched the block, panic clawing at my throat. Then I saw it. A faint light flickering in the woods behind the neighborhood. Not a street light. Too dim, too uneven. Like a lantern. I didn't think, I just ran. Branches tore at my arms, the ground uneven beneath my feet. My lungs burned, but I kept going until the trees parted and a small cabin appeared. Light seeped through the cracks in the boarded windows. I grabbed a rusted crowbar leaning against the wall outside. My hands shook, but rage and fear carried me through the door. "If you touch him, I'll kill you," I screamed. The cabin was silent. Empty, except for Jamie. He was curled in a corner, arms wrapped tight around himself, sobbing. Relief hit so hard I nearly collapsed. "Jamie!" I dropped the crowbar and rushed to him, pulling him close. "It's okay, baby. Mommy's here." But he recoiled, shrinking away from me. His eyes were wide, terrified. "Please," he whispered. "Don't hurt me again, Mommy." The words froze me where I stood. I don't remember much after that. My body moved, but my mind cracked wide open. I tried to tell myself he was confused, scared, maybe still half dreaming. But deep down I knew. The cameras hadn't lied. The man I thought I saw in the footage, the Shadow Man brushing Jamie's hair, standing over him while he slept, it wasn't a stranger. It was me. Dissociation, they call it. When your mind fractures. When you split yourself into pieces so you can keep living with yourself. My brain had turned me into two people. Rachel the protector, and Rachel the monster. I remembered flashes. Holding Jamie too tightly when he cried, shaking him until his teeth rattled, whispering things I didn't mean. His screams in the night weren't nightmares, they were memories. Every time I saw the Shadow Man at the playground, the grocery store, the parking lot, it was my own reflection. Warped glass, half-glimpsed windows, the truth I refused to face. And Jamie knew. The look in his eyes that night in the cabin will haunt me forever. He wasn't just scared of some faceless man, he was scared of me. They say memory is unreliable, that trauma twists what we see. But I can't deny it anymore. The Shadow Man was never real. He was the part of me I didn't want to see, the part I locked away until it clawed back out. I wanted so badly to be the perfect mother, the protector, the safe place. But exhaustion, loneliness, and rage curdled into something else. Something I couldn't admit even to myself. I don't know what will happen now. Whether Jamie will ever forgive me. Whether I even deserve forgiveness. Sometimes I look in the mirror and catch my own reflection and flinch, half expecting to see the Shadow Man staring back. But there's no Shadow Man, just me. And maybe that's the scariest truth of all. The monsters we fear are not always lurking outside our doors. They can live inside us, hidden beneath denial and desperation. Protecting those we love means facing our own darkness before it consumes them. When I look back at that night, I can't decide if it started with the car breaking down or years earlier when everything inside me began to rot. But I'll start with the car, because that's easier to explain. I had been on the road for 12 straight hours, running on caffeine and nerves, when the engine finally coughed and gave up on Highway 41. The rain was relentless, slamming against the windshield like it had been waiting for me to fail. The wipers dragged across the glass with a useless squeak until I killed the ignition. My phone had no service. The map on the dash showed nothing but miles of black road cutting through farmland. I should have felt panic, but what I felt instead was resignation. Things had been falling apart for so long that a dead car felt like just another nail in the coffin. My marriage was over. My job gone after too many missed shifts and one too many drunken arguments with the boss. My father, the only person who ever gave me straight advice, was buried 6 months earlier. All I had left was a suitcase of clothes, an overdrawn checking account, and a restlessness that kept me from staying anywhere for more than a few weeks. Through the downpour, I saw the faint flicker of a neon sign. Sunset Motel. Vacancy. The kind of roadside place you only go to when you're out of options. The sign buzzed and sputtered, the orange glow barely cutting through the rain, but it was enough to get me moving. I walked the mile in soaked shoes, suitcase dragging behind me. The lobby reeked of stale coffee and bleach, like someone had tried to scrub away decades of smoke and mildew, but only managed to mix the smells into something worse. Behind the counter stood an older man with watery blue eyes and a smile that didn't reach them. His name tag said Earl. "Car trouble?" he asked, voice flat but polite. "Yeah, broke down back there," I said, running a hand over my face. He slid a brass key across the counter. "Room 6. But listen, son, don't go outside after dark. Nothing good happens out there." I gave a short laugh. "Right, thanks for the advice." The room wasn't much. Peeling wallpaper curling at the edges, a carpet that smelled faintly of mildew, a fridge humming like it was ready to die. But there was a bed, and I was too exhausted to care. I threw my wet clothes over a chair, collapsed onto the mattress, and drifted into a heavy sleep. It must have been after midnight when the shouting woke me. At first I thought it was thunder, but then I heard it clearly. A man's voice, sharp with anger, spilling through the thin walls, then a gunshot, then a child crying. My heart hammered. I pressed my ear to the wall. The sound was unmistakable. I grabbed the phone and dialed the front desk. Earl answered immediately. "There's a fight in room 7, I shouted. "Someone fired a gun. I heard it." Silence. Then Earl's voice, calm and steady. "Sir, you're the only guest tonight." The line clicked dead. I sat frozen, the receiver still pressed to my ear, listening to the dial tone buzz in my skull. My skin prickled, every nerve awake. I paced the room, whispering to myself that it had to be a dream, a nightmare, the kind where you wake in a sweat and laugh about it later. But then the crying came again, louder this time. A child's sobs rising and falling through the wall like they were in the room with me. I snapped. I stormed into the hallway, bare feet slapping against the damp carpet, and kicked open the door to room 7. The smell hit first. Burnt gunpowder, faint but undeniable. The room itself was gutted. Bare floorboards, rotting wallpaper, dust thick enough to choke. No bed, no furniture, no signs of anyone living there. "Hello?" I shouted, voice cracking. "Is anybody here?" My words echoed back at me, hollow. I stumbled backward into the hallway, shaking. The crying had stopped. Only the rain outside and the hum of the lights remained. Back in my room, I collapsed into the chair, dragging my wet clothes onto my lap like a shield. My hands wouldn't stop trembling. Minutes later, blue and red lights cut through the curtains. Sirens wailed. I rushed to the window. Police cruisers screeched into the parking lot. Boots thundered down the hall. A pounding on my door. "Police! Open up." Confused, I obeyed. Officers flooded in, guns drawn, shoving me to the floor. Cold metal cuffs snapped around my wrists. "What the hell is this?" "I didn't do anything," I shouted, panic strangling my voice. A detective crouched beside me, face stern, eyes sharp. "Jack Dwyer, you're under arrest for the murder of your wife and 2 children." The words didn't make sense. They slammed into me like a punch to the chest. "What? That's insane. I don't even have kids." But as the words left my mouth, flashes cut through my mind. My wife's face, tear-streaked, 2 children screaming, the deafening crack of a gunshot in a motel room just like this one. I thrashed against the cuffs. "No, you've got the wrong guy." The detective's expression didn't change. He spoke like he was reciting a fact. "You killed them, Jack. Here, in this motel." I shook my head violently. "No, I didn't. I don't even—" But the images came sharper now, piercing through the fog I'd built in my brain. My wife's voice begging, my own hand gripping the gun, the smell of smoke. "No," I whispered, rocking against the floor. "No, no, no." The wallpaper around me began to ripple. The peeling edges dissolved into white padded walls. The brass key I had shoved into my pocket shifted into a plastic wristband clamped around my arm. The humming fridge became the relentless buzz of fluorescent lights. I wasn't in a motel. I was in Ward 6 of the county psychiatric hospital, the officers pinning me down blurred into nurses in pale scrubs. Earl wasn't a motel manager. He was an orderly. The desk, the neon sign, the warning about going outside after dark, it was all my mind's way of making sense of where I was. Room 7 didn't exist. There was only the empty space in my head where I had tried to bury what I'd done. I screamed as they dragged me up, my bare feet sliding across the linoleum. But the sound of a child crying followed me down the hallway. The doctors tell me I've been here for weeks, that I was brought in after neighbors heard the gunshots, that when the police arrived I was sitting in the motel room with the bodies, staring at the gun in my hand. I don't remember it like that. My memory insists on highways and rain, on neon signs and peeling wallpaper, but every night when the lights dim and the hall's quiet, the other version breaks through. The crying, the shouting, the gunshot. Sometimes I try to argue with the doctors. I didn't have kids, I tell them. I didn't have a family. But then they slide photographs across the table. A smiling woman, 2 children with my eyes. I can't look at them for more than a second before nausea takes over. I ask where the photos came from, and they just say, "From your house, Jack." The truth presses against me like a weight. The motel wasn't a place I stumbled into after a car broke down. It was where I made my last stand against the life I had ruined. A roadside room where I ended it all. Now Ward 6 has become my world. Earl brings meals on a tray. The nurses check my vitals. The walls don't peel, but I swear sometimes I see stains spreading across them, dark and red, then gone when I blink. At night, I hear the crying. Always the crying. They say time dulls pain, but here it only sharpens it. Every day I replay what happened. Sometimes I convince myself it wasn't real, that my wife and kids are still out there somewhere, waiting for me to come home. Other times, the guilt crashes down so heavy I can't breathe. I pace the small room, fists pressed against my temples, whispering to myself. It was an accident. It wasn't me. But deep down, I know better. The mind can twist, can fracture, can invent neon signs and motel clerks to cover the truth. But memory doesn't die. It claws back through the cracks, dragging you into the reality you tried to bury. Every night I lie in the narrow hospital bed, staring at the ceiling, listening. The crying comes soft at first, then louder until it fills the room. Sometimes I press my hands over my ears, but it doesn't help. The sound comes from inside me. I whisper apologies into the darkness, but the cries never stop. And I know they never will. You can run from the world, you can even run from yourself for a time, but the truth has no expiration date. Guilt doesn't vanish. It waits, festers, and bleeds back through the cracks of your mind. What you bury will always dig itself free, and when it does, it will demand to be heard. My name is Louisa Evans, and I've never been good at staying in one place for too long. Growing up in Indiana, I used to think I'd settle into a quiet life. Maybe work at the local clinic like my mother did, marry young, raise kids who'd go to the same schools I went to. That kind of thing. But nothing turned out the way I imagined. Life never does. After my mother died, I left home, drifting between cities until I landed in this one. By then, I had a history I didn't want to talk about anymore. A relationship gone bad, some debts, things I tried to bury by moving far away. I found work at Ashwood Psychiatric Hospital, mostly by chance. A friend of a friend said they were desperate for night nurses. No one wanted the graveyard shift. The pay was steady, the benefits good enough. And maybe, I told myself, the quiet nights would give me space to think, to heal. The first time I walked through those long, sterile hallways, the air smelled faintly of antiseptic and old metal. The walls were lined with pale green paint that always looked sickly under fluorescent light. The patients were mostly sedated by night, kept calm with medication. You'd hear the occasional groan or mutter from behind locked doors, but it wasn't loud. Mostly, it was still, almost too still. I liked it that way. But not room 19. Room 19 was down the East Hall, near the old wing that hardly anyone used anymore. The first time I passed it, I slowed, not sure why. My rounds were routine. Check vitals, record logs, make sure the doors were locked. But something about that door felt different. My hand hesitated over the clipboard as I peered through the observation window, and that's when I saw her. A woman strapped to the bed, wrists and ankles bound in thick leather restraints. Her face was pale, her eyes wide open, darting back and forth like a trapped animal. But it was her mouth that made me stop cold. Thick black stitches crisscrossed her lips, pulling the skin so tight it puckered. She made a muffled sound, like she was screaming behind the thread, but no words came out. I stepped back, my heart pounding. I asked one of the senior nurses about her later, careful to sound casual. "Who's in room 19? The nurse barely looked up from her paperwork. "That room's not your concern." That was all she said. After that, I started dreading that hallway. I told myself not to look, but every time I passed, I'd catch myself glancing in just for a second, and there she was, staring at me with those wild eyes. Sometimes she thrashed, the restraints creaking against the bed frame. Other times she just lay still, tears sliding down her face. I wondered who she was, how she ended up like that, and why no one seemed to acknowledge her existence. No chart, no name on the door, nothing. It was like she wasn't supposed to be there at all. But she was, and somehow, I knew she was watching me. The hospital at 3 a.m. always had a strange hum to it, like the walls themselves were alive. That night was no different until I reached the East Hall. I glanced through the glass of room 19 out of habit, and froze. The bed was empty. The restraints dangled loose, swaying slightly, as if someone had just slipped free. "Shit," I whispered, fumbling for my radio. "Room 19. The patient's gone." There was a pause on the line. Then the supervisor's voice crackled back, slow and confused. "Evans, there is no room 19 patient. That room's been empty for years." My throat went dry. But when I rushed back, the bed was neatly made. The straps coiled perfectly on the mattress. Empty. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes boring into me. Over the next week, the sightings began. I saw her at the far end of the hallway, a pale figure standing in the dim light before vanishing as I blinked. Once, in the break room, I caught her reflection in the window, blood dripping down her chin where the stitches had torn loose. When I spun around, the room was empty. I tried to tell one of the other nurses. She gave me a look like I was crazy. "You're overtired, Evans. Get some sleep." Maybe she was right. Maybe I was just exhausted. But then came the night I checked the medicine cabinet. I bent down to grab supplies, looked up, and in the glass, she was standing directly behind me, close enough that I should have felt her breath. Her stitched mouth quivered, threads stained dark. I dropped the tray, glass shattering across the floor. By the time another nurse rushed in, the figure was gone. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I knew then this wasn't just exhaustion. Something was wrong and I had to prove it. So I pulled the security footage. What I found hollowed me out. It wasn't her on the tapes. It was me, standing motionless in corners, leaning over patients as they slept, staring directly at the cameras with eyes so empty I didn't recognize myself. I couldn't breathe as I watched the footage over and over, hoping it would change. But it didn't. It was me in the hallways, me in the corners, me with that vacant stare. When I told myself I was seeing the stitched-mouth woman, was it really just me? I barely slept for days. Coffee and adrenaline kept me moving, but my body felt like it was unraveling. During rounds, I'd catch glimpses of myself in reflective glass and jump, swearing the woman was there just behind me. Once I found a small surgical kit in my locker. Thread, needles, scissors stained faintly brown. I swore I hadn't put it there. The paranoia grew. Every shadow stretched too long, every sound echoed. I started snapping at co-workers. When one nurse asked if I was okay, I nearly screamed at her. I told myself I had to keep it together. I was a nurse, a professional. But the truth was leaking through cracks I couldn't patch. One night I sat in the staff lounge, staring at my hands. Black thread clung to my fingertips, thin fibers caught beneath my nails. I rubbed them raw, trying to make them clean. The stitched-mouth woman appeared again, this time in the window across from me. She didn't move, just watched. Her lips stretched in a grotesque smile, stitches tearing, blood seeping down her chin. "Why me?" I whispered. My own voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. No answer came, just silence and her eyes boring into mine. That was when I knew I couldn't hide anymore. I needed help, or at least answers. The next morning I went to the supervisor's office, my body trembled with every step. I shut the door behind me and sat down across from him, gripping the arms of the chair until my knuckles ached. "There's something wrong with me," I whispered. "I keep seeing her, this woman and the cameras." My voice cracked. "It's me on them. I don't know what's happening." The supervisor frowned, tilting his head. "Louisa, there is no stitched-mouth patient. There never was." "No." I slammed my hands on his desk. "I saw her. I feel her." He leaned forward, his tone softer, almost pitying. "Do you remember why you're here?" I blinked, confused. "I'm a nurse, I work here. I've been on staff for 3 years." He sighed, sliding a folder toward me. My hands shook as I opened it. Photographs spilled out. A surgical kit. A woman bound to a bed, her lips crudely sewn shut, her eyes wide with terror. My stomach lurched. "That's not..." My words tangled. "That's not me." His voice was calm, firm. "You were admitted 2 years ago, Louisa, after the incident. The stitched-mouth woman wasn't someone else, she was your victim." I shoved the photos away. "No, I help people, I'm a nurse." But in the glass of his office window, I saw myself. Not in uniform, not holding a clipboard, but in a hospital gown. My hair tangled, my skin pale, black thread still clinging to my fingertips. And behind me, the stitched-mouth woman smiled. The days after blurred together. I stopped trusting anything I saw, anything I felt. The uniform I thought I wore was just in my head. The keys I carried weren't real. The rounds I thought I made. Fabrications stitched together in a brain that didn't want to face the truth. They moved me to a private room. Sometimes I'd wake strapped to the bed, screaming until my throat gave out. Other times, I'd sit quietly, hands in my lap, staring at the wall while the memory of thread-cutting skin replayed in my mind like a film I couldn't shut off. The stitched-mouth woman never left. She stood in corners, reflected in glass, smiling that broken smile. Sometimes I felt her hand on my shoulder. Sometimes I heard her voice, muffled but clear enough to understand. "You can't undo it." The doctor said I was delusional, that I had built a new identity as a nurse to protect myself from guilt. They said it wasn't uncommon after severe trauma that denial could weave an entire false life. But in the deepest part of me, I knew it wasn't just guilt. The woman was real. Her rage lived inside me, stitched into my skin, reminding me every day of what I had done. I'm not sure anymore where reality ends and my mind begins. Maybe I'll never know. Maybe that's the real punishment. All I know is this. When I close my eyes, I see her smile. And when I wake, I feel the thread between my fingers, waiting for me to remember again. Guilt cannot be buried under lies or denial. Left unspoken, it grows into something that stalks us, warps reality, and consumes who we are. Facing our past, even the darkest parts, is the only way to heal. To look away is to let the stitches tighten until we no longer know ourselves. People always say small towns have long memories, but I never found that to be true. Folks forget faster than you'd think. They remember gossip, sure, and they'll talk about who bought a new truck or whose kid got caught sneaking beer behind the football bleachers. But the deeper things, the ones that cut, those get buried quick. That's why I liked running a motel off Highway 17. People came and went. No one lingered. No one asked questions. And whatever they saw was forgotten. The second they merged back onto the highway. I inherited the place from my uncle, who inherited it from my grandfather. Highway 17. Motel wasn't much to look at. Faded yellow paint, a neon vacancy sign that buzzed whether it was lit or not, and a lobby that smelled faintly of burned coffee. But it paid the bills. I made sure to greet everyone the same way. A smile, a cup of coffee, and a discount I claimed was because they looked tired. Travelers liked that. Made them feel like they'd stumbled on some rare kindness out in the middle of nowhere. What they didn't realize was that kindness is the easiest mask to wear. The rooms were nothing special. Threadbare carpets, beds with creaky frames, TVs older than some of my guests. But I kept the records sharp. Every payment logged, every signature neat. If the police ever came around asking questions, I could hand them a binder that made me look like the most upright motel manager in Nebraska. And they did come around every now and then. Someone's sister didn't make it to Kansas City, or a trucker didn't check back in with dispatch. Cops would sweep through, poke their heads into the rooms, check the laundry, maybe run a black light in the bathroom if they felt ambitious. But they never found anything. Not the soundproofed rooms, not the journals, not the people who stopped screaming only after their voices broke. I didn't see myself as cruel. I wasn't like the killers you read about, the ones who take trophies or write letters to the newspapers. I didn't raise a fist or a knife. I only wanted to understand something no one else seemed to care about, the precise moment when hope drained out of a person. Not when they died, but when they realized no one was coming for them. It started years earlier. A drifter, middle-aged, came through in winter. He had no ID, no bags, no one to call. He looked at me with that blank, exhausted expression I'd seen 100 times. I knew, just by the way he stood at the counter, that if he disappeared, no one would notice. That night, when I slid the bolt on the first soundproofed room, I felt calm, like I was stepping into a role I'd been rehearsing for my whole life. The motel itself became my partner. The vents carried the echoes. The pipes moaned at night, covering faint cries. Guests complained sometimes, about sobbing, about scratching in the walls. I'd apologize, hand them free breakfast, and smile. Old building, I'd say. Pipes like to talk. They always accepted it. People want to believe they're safe. That was the beauty of it. The motel looked like every other cheap roadside stop in America, and I looked like every other tired manager. No one noticed the difference until it was too late. The night that really stuck with me began with a woman named Teresa. She came in driving a beat-up Honda with plates from Texas. It was late, past 11, and she looked worn down to the bone. Her hair was tangled, her hands trembling when she passed me her ID. I asked the usual questions. Where are you headed? How was the road? She told me she was driving to see her sister in Des Moines. I nodded, smiled, slid her a room key, and added, "Because you look tired, I'll give you a discount." She gave me a grateful smile, the kind people give when they believe they've found a pocket of kindness in a rough stretch of road. That smile was always my confirmation. Around midnight, I knocked on her door. "Everything all right in there?" She opened it, just a crack. Her face showed hesitation, but she didn't push back when I asked if I could step inside. A few minutes later, the bolt clicked behind us. I didn't strike her, didn't raise my voice. I led her down the back hallway, past the supply closet and into the room that looked like any other until the door shut and the deadbolt slid. Inside, concrete walls and a heavy steel door replaced the faded wallpaper and squeaky carpet. She didn't scream right away. Most didn't. They thought it was a mistake, a prank, something that could be talked through. By the third day, her voice was ragged. I wrote in my journal, "Day 3. Subject calls for sister by name, still hopeful someone will arrive." By the 7th day, she'd stopped shouting and started bargaining. Promises, prayers, anything. Day 7. Subject pleads, offers money. Alternates between anger and sobbing. Still believes release possible. By the 12th day, her voice broke into a whisper. Prayers too soft to hear clearly. Day 12. Subject whispers. Hope nearly extinguished. Acceptance phase approaching. I never wrote about the end. That wasn't the part that mattered. What mattered was the change, the flicker of hope as it burned out. And every time I learned a little more about people, about how much they could take, about what broke first. Sometimes it was their voice, sometimes it was their faith. The world outside never stopped. Truckers came and went, families checked in for a night, backpackers left their dirty socks behind. I smiled, offered coffee, and listened. No one ever suspected that just a few doors away someone else was counting their last days. That's what I loved about it, the invisibility of it all. Evil doesn't need a mask or a monster's face. Sometimes it looks like a man with kind eyes and a motel ledger neat enough to impress the sheriff. The motel changed as I did. By the late 90s, the paint was peeling worse, and fewer families stopped by. The highway stretched on with newer, shinier places offering free breakfast buffets and cable TV. My place became a haunt for the desperate, the broke, the running, the forgotten. Exactly the kind of people who wouldn't be missed. I started noticing patterns. People traveling alone gave themselves away in little ways. They never took ice from the machine because there was no one to share a drink with. They parked crooked, like it didn't matter. They lingered too long in the lobby when I made small talk, grateful for any kind of connection. One man, name of Mark, left behind a duffel bag with nothing but 2 shirts and a bottle of pills. He was one of those quiet types who avoided eye contact. He lasted 8 days. His voice gave out on day 5. He spent the last 3 days rocking in silence. My journal entry ended with just one line. Subject resigned. No further resistance. Sometimes I thought about what would happen if the police pressed harder, if they tore down the drywall or checked the foundations, but they never did. They were content with binders of records and my tired smile. Once a deputy even thanked me for keeping such neat logs, said I made their job easier. I nearly laughed in his face. The town whispered, "Of course, small towns always do." People talked about disappearances, about folks who checked in but didn't check out. But talk was just that, talk. Without proof, no one cared enough to look deeper. And proof was the one thing I never left behind. Well, almost never. There was one guest, a younger man, maybe 22, backpacker type. He scratched words into the concrete wall before he stopped fighting. I noticed them when I cleaned the room. 4 words, ragged, nearly illegible. Someone will find this. I chiseled them out, painted over the spot, but those words burned into me more than any scream. Someone would find it eventually. And that thought both terrified and thrilled me. By the time the motel started falling apart for real, I was an old man. The neon sign buzzed louder than ever. Most of the rooms were barely rentable, and the highway brought fewer travelers each year. The county finally posted a notice. The place was condemned. I packed what I could, stacked my journals neatly in a drawer, and left the rooms sealed. I didn't feel fear. I felt completion. Like a man who'd finished a lifetime of study and was ready to close the book. Years passed before I heard what the inspectors found. I was living 2 towns over under a different name when it hit the local news. 3 rooms sealed tight. Rusted locks. Concrete scarred with claw marks. Journals filled with every detail of despair. The camera lingered on the guest book they pulled from my old desk. Page after page of names, signatures, and dates. People missing for years. And at the very end, my handwriting, still careful despite the tremor of age. Checkout complete. I suppose you're wondering why I'm telling you this. Maybe you think it's a confession, or maybe you think it's another one of my stories, the kind people dismiss as roadside legend. Truth is, it doesn't matter. By the time you hear this, the motel will already be dust, the walls leveled, the rooms emptied. But the lesson of it all, if you want to call it that, still matters. Evil doesn't come with warning signs. It doesn't wear a mask or announce itself with blood. It smiles at you across a counter, offers you coffee, and asks where you're headed. It hides in plain sight, in places you forget the moment you leave. That's the silence I studied all those years. Not just the silence of people who stopped screaming, but the silence of a world that doesn't want to see what's right in front of it. And now, as I sit in a small rented room far from Highway 17, I wonder if anyone will ever understand what I was really chasing. Not death, not cruelty, just the moment when hope flickered out. That moment, to me, was the truest sound of silence. The story of Kingston Cox is a reminder that evil often hides in plain sight, masked by kindness and routine. We expect danger to look monstrous, but the most frightening truths are ordinary people who quietly decide to harm others without cause. The lesson is that we must not ignore the small warnings, the strange feelings, or the stories people dismiss. Paying attention, really paying attention, can be the difference between safety and silence. When I signed the lease, I told the landlord I needed a fresh start. He nodded, shoved a set of keys into my palm, and didn't ask anything else. People in small towns never do. They size you up, decide you're either harmless or not worth the trouble, and let you disappear into the background. That's exactly what I wanted. The little house sat at the edge of town, paint peeling from its siding, porch steps sagging with rot. Inside, it smelled faintly of dust and old wood. To anyone else, it might have looked like a sad excuse for a home, but to me it was a refuge. I moved in with 2 suitcases and a box of photographs I couldn't bring myself to throw away. My wife's smile was pressed flat between glass and cardboard, my daughter's laugh frozen in glossy colors that felt more unreal every time I looked at them. Everyone thought I lost them to an accident. The official report said faulty wiring, a tragedy, unavoidable. People left flowers at the ruins, shook my hand at the funeral, told me how sorry they were. But in the pit of my stomach, I knew something was wrong. I remembered the smell of gasoline in the air that night. I remembered how fast the flames spread, how unnatural it looked, and I remembered my daughter's voice, high and sharp, shrieking my name as the house came down. I buried those suspicions under routine. Wake up, work at the hardware store, come home, eat something from a can, sleep. I thought if I just kept moving, the ghosts wouldn't catch me. But silence is heavier than people realize. It presses in at night. It crawls into your chest and reminds you of what you lost. Sometimes I swore I heard faint crackling like a campfire somewhere far away. Sometimes I woke coughing, the sharp sting of smoke in my nose, though the air in the house was still. Neighbors noticed. One old man across the street told others he'd seen me outside barefoot at 2 a.m, muttering to myself, holding something shiny in my hand. Maybe just insomnia, he said, but suspicion dripped from his voice. I ignored him. Until the morning I woke in my backyard, barefoot, clutching a book of matches, my clothes faintly smelling of gasoline. I scrubbed myself raw in the shower, water running cold over skin that stung with guilt. I stared at my reflection and wondered if I'd lost my mind. I told myself it was stress, nightmares bleeding into waking life, but deep down, I knew it was more. The only way to be sure was to see it with my own eyes. That night I set up cameras in the living room, the hallway, even outside by the shed. I sat on the couch with the remote in my hand until exhaustion pulled me under. The next morning, dread coiled in my stomach as I hit play. At 3:17 a.m., there I was. My body moved like it belonged to someone else, eyes blank, mouth whispering words I couldn't hear. I carried a gas can across the living room, splashing it onto the floorboards in wide arcs. I held a match, struck it, the flame glowing bright. My hand hovered over the puddle of gasoline. My lips moved faster, as though praying. Then, after a long pause, I blew the match out. I staggered away from the screen, bile rising in my throat. The ritual repeated again and again. Strike a match, whisper, hover, blow it out. I didn't remember any of it. By daylight, I forced myself to go through the motions, clock in at the hardware store, answer questions about paint and nails, smile at customers. But every time I looked at the shelves of gasoline cans, my chest tightened. That evening, I couldn't take it anymore. I drove to the nearest doctor, hands shaking as I gripped the wheel. "I'm sleepwalking," I told him, voice cracking. "I'm doing things I don't remember. Dangerous things." He studied me, flipping through a thick folder, his brow furrowed. Then he closed it and looked me straight in the eye. "This isn't new, Robert," he said softly. "You've been here before." My throat tightened. "What do you mean?" "You came to us after the fire, do you remember?" The room tilted, my chest clenched. His words dug into me like knives. "No," I whispered, shaking my head. "That's not true. The fire was an accident, faulty wiring." The doctor's expression didn't waver. "That's what you told yourself. But we've been working with you since then. You've had sessions, medication, monitoring. You signed yourself into our care." The edges of the room seemed to blur. My hands gripped the armrests of the chair so tightly my knuckles went white. Memories pushed up from the depths, jagged and sharp. I remembered sitting in a room like this before, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. I remembered nurses with soft voices and locked doors that clicked shut behind me. Most of all, I remembered that night, the can in my hand, the smell of gasoline, sweet and sickening, my wife's voice breaking into a scream, my daughter crying, my own whisper, some promise, some prayer I couldn't quite piece together before I struck the match. I bent forward, gasping, but the air wouldn't fill my lungs. The doctor spoke calmly, like this was routine. "You're here now, Robert. You've always been here. The house you think you rented, the neighbors, even the cameras, it's all part of your treatment. It helps you externalize the urges, but you circle back to the fire. You always do." I covered my ears, shaking my head. No, I moved here. I saw the house, I signed the lease, But even as I said it, I could see the truth unraveling. The landlord's pen, the contract, the old man across the street, they blurred, twisted, shifted into orderlies, nurses, staff watching me with careful eyes. My stomach lurched. I wasn't rebuilding my life. I was replaying it. That night I lay in the narrow bed, staring at the ceiling as the hum of fluorescent lights filled the silence. I tried to tell myself the doctor was wrong, that grief had twisted my mind, that this was just another cruel dream. But when the shadows grew long, I heard the crackle again. Not from the vents, not from outside, but inside my skull. I smelled smoke. When I blinked, the walls of the room seemed to ripple, peeling into wood paneling, stained carpet, photographs on the dresser, my daughter's shoes by the door, my wife's sweater draped across a chair, home, and me in the middle of it, holding a gas can. I dropped it, scrambling backward, but my body and the vision moved on its own. Blank eyes, steady hands. whispering words like a prayer. I wanted to scream, but my throat locked. The vision me struck a match. Firelight danced across his face. I closed my eyes. When I opened them again, the room was white, sterile, humming with electricity. My fists clenched the blanket. My breath came in ragged gasps. The fire wasn't haunting me. It was living inside me, waiting for the night to crack open so it could breathe again. The staff tell me it's progress to remember. They say facing the truth is the only way forward. But they don't hear what I hear. They don't smell what I smell. Every night it comes back. The matches in my hand, the gasoline on my clothes, the voices of my wife and daughter crying out as the fire eats them alive. I try to tell myself I won't let it happen again. I pace the room. I press my hands together and whisper apologies, bargains, promises. I strike imaginary matches in the air and blow them out before they touch flame. I repeat the ritual until my throat is raw. But I know the truth. No matter how many times I blow out the match, sooner or later, I'll let it burn. I am not haunted by the fire. I am the fire. You cannot run from the truth you carry inside. Guilt is not a shadow that follows, it is a spark waiting to ignite.